right. We just came out of executive session where we had we were conducting strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel. So the meeting is now open. Pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I was enjoying the hallway.
Is there anyone here for weekly briefing? Public comments? There is one, just that there will be an informational meeting with the MSBA, Executive Director John McCarthy, on August 1st, 2012 at the Chatham Town Hall Annex, hosted by the Monomoy Regional School District School Building Committee. 4 p.m., I believe.
Yep, 4 p.m.
Any other public comments or announcements?
Carl Schutte. I had a meeting with the town administrator this week and just wanted an informational package to be added to the Selectmen meetings of June 25th. I'm not sure if that was mentioned to the Board of Selectmen as of now, about the special permit that was issued at the June 25th meeting. This is an informational package with some facts and some past history that the Board of Selectmen voted on 14 years ago. I'd like it to be added to the Board of Selectmen minutes for that date, and I'd also like to read this petition that was signed by many of the charter fishing permit holders down in the town of Harwich. The following are names of charter boat operators in the town of Harwich that would like to state the following. We all believe the information provided by Mr. Len Grenier to the Board of Selectmen and the Waterways Committee was misleading and untrue. We also believe the special permit given to Mr. Grenier goes against the harbor management plan and also gives him an unfair advantage over other charter boat operators in the town of Harwich. We would like to go on record that we are against the special permit arrangement given to Mr. Grenier, sincerely, and it's signed by the members of the different permit holders in the town of Harwich. So at this time I'd like to present this to the town administrator for distribution to the board, and would like them just to review it before if they decide whether to reopen the issue on the special permit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shute. Anyone else for public comment or announcements?
Madam Chair. I think we all read in the newspaper that on the 13th, a member of our community of long standing passed away, Ms. Chris Woods, who had served on numerous town committees and commissions over the years: the Cemetery Commission, Brooks Academy Museum Commission, Historical Commission, Harwich Center Initiative Committee. Also served for many years as Superintendent Jess Morgan's secretary, back in the days when the superintendent's office was in the Brooks Academy building. She passed away, and I think the town will be feeling her loss. Her depth of knowledge of affairs in Harwich is going to be sorely missed, and I'd like to ask for a moment of silence in her memory. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Anyone else? Consent agenda. Mr. Hughes?
Madam Chair, I move the following consent agenda. Approved minutes of June 11, 2012 regular session, June 18, 2012 regular session. Vote to sign order for joint or identical pole locations for Verizon for Route 137 project. Vote to sign the state primary election warrant. Vote to sign ballot for the special election ballot. Vote to accept the resignation of Ron Nordstrom from the planning board. Vote to approve recommendation of Fire Chief Norm Clark to award sale of surplus vehicle to Boyne Construction in the amount of $2,550. Vote to authorize the chair to sign local action unit application for HDCD approval to establish 2 affordable housing units at the property located at 114 and 116 Oak Street per request of Hetch. Vote to send a letter to the Carl Schutte relative to the charter boat and D-class slips and permits. And vote to approve a 3-day special license application for wine and malt for Lower Cape Communications doing business as WOMR 92.1 FM for an event to be held on September 14, 2012 from 5 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. September 15th, 2012 from 12 noon to 7 p.m. and September 16th, 2012 from 12 noon to 6 p.m. at Brooks Park.
Second.
Thank you, Larry. Discussion? Ed?
Madam Chair, I'll abstain from voting on item I.
Okay. Peter?
And I would just ask on item I, number 1, have the neighbors been notified because it was an issue in the past, just so they're prepared for it, and what the police presence, because it will be alcohol served at that, what the police presence plan will be, if someone could tell us that.
Someone who can answer that? Ed?
Well, yes, the neighbors, most all the neighbors, I think there are 2 neighbors that we still have to contact, but most all the neighbors have been, and we have been in discussions with the police on what their requirements are going to be.
And I understand that they're going to be using wristbands
Yes.
to make sure that underage is maintained or not maintained, so to speak. The tent will be enclosed.
Well, I'm not sure if the tent will be enclosed, but there'll be a boundary.
Yeah, that's what I mean, a
Around.
perimeter.
Perimeter set up. And the event on the Friday night is in conjunction with the South Harwich Meeting House, and their event is a ticket attendance event.
Okay. Any other comments? All right, on the consent agenda, from items A through H, A through I, excuse me, with Mr. McManus abstaining from item I. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. All right, next on the agenda is the public hearing that we are continuing from June 25th on proposed harbor management plan amendments. Mr. Hart.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and the board and guests. As you indicated, we're continuing the changes to the harbor management plan, primarily definitions. I provided for the board a document that has 4 items, and if it's your permission, I'll start with the first one.
Please.
All right, the first one, what we have are, there's 2 or 3 of these that are definitions. In other words, right now in the harbor management plan, there's no mention of this. This just defines what they are. The first one is a charter/fishing/passenger boat for hire, known as a charter boat. A boat operated as a commercial enterprise that carries passengers for hire for the purpose of fishing on the coastal waters, period. A commercial enterprise is defined as an operation where a person provides fishing guide or charter boat services in exchange for consideration including money, goods, and services. There's no existing definition in the harbor management plan, and this would be added in the harbor management plan just before charter fishing boat special permit. Do you want to go through all of them, or do you want to
Yeah, so
one
Let's
at a
just go through
time?
all of them.
Because I know one of them is going to take quite a while.
Okay.
That's the last one.
All right, I'll take the next one. The next one is mooring float or sailing changing dinghy storage float. You may be familiar with this. We had a discussion about this a while back. Again, this is just for the definition in the harbor management plan, and it would be a moored structure for the purpose being used as a floating dock for 2 boats or for the storage of small boats or dinghies. There's no existing definition in the harbor management plan, for this mooring float. This would be listed in the harbor management plan after mooring boatyard transient.
I presume then this definition allows the harbor master then to place these as in concordance with that and based on safety of the placement.
Yes, Mr. Ballantyne. All this is saying is in the town of Harwich,
These are now allowed.
they exist.
Yeah.
And now the procedure after that is to go into the harbor master, and the other things are after that. This just lists that they exist in the town of Harwich.
Other questions?
No, there's one more.
All right. The next one is similar. It's a motif display mooring. Based on individual request to the harbor master, a permit can be allowed for a temporary mooring of a small vessel for purposes of a tasteful or seasonal motif in the area of Route 28 Bridge on the Herring River in shallow water, which is not conducive to mooring or navigation aids for regular boats. Again, a motif is not in the harbor management plan. This would be added at the end of section 3.14, and it's a new addition by request.
It's the boat that everybody paints.
Is there a definition that is going to be made for tasteful?
Again,
What?
The eye of the beholder.
The eye of the beholder.
the eye is the beholder and the permission of the harbor master.
Harbor masters.
And does he have taste? We'll find out, I guess. Ed?
Just a note, I think at the, towards the end of it, it says Herring River in shallow waters which is not conductive. I think you mean conducive.
You are correct. Thank you.
Because I'm not sure
I'm not gonna have-
we're conducting.
We're going to put electric wires out there.
Putting it out there as a target for a lightning strike or something.
Okay. Conducive. Thank you.
We'll fix
Good
the
catch.
T.
There's also a problem with the first sentence.
Peter?
There's also, Matt, a problem with the first sentence, because where it says purposes of a tasteful, a seasonal motif, that doesn't make sense to me.
A tasteful and
Something like that.
or seasonal.
Something like
You
that.
could have or seasonal.
A comma works also.
Okay.
I think it was supposed to be a comma
Yeah,
instead of
get
an
rid of the
A.
A and put a comma there, it works fine.
Tasteful. Okay.
We'll have to check with the superintendent of schools to make sure we're correct.
As you might, Madam Chair,
Yes?
you might during the summer want to have a nice colorful little fishing dory for the painters, but at Halloween time you might want something floating with goblins and ghosts coming out of it, not necessarily on the tasteful side, but seasonal.
Well, with my ancestors, I'm thinking of St. Patrick's Day, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I
Yes?
make a suggestion? Because I do believe that that Matt is probably correct. There will be some discussion on the fourth one.
Mhm.
Can I move that we accept the first three with the changes that have been suggested?
Second.
I'm totally in favor of that, Madam Chairman, if it's agree with
We
you.
have to close the public hearing first.
Well, at least we have to open it to public testimony.
Yes, so,
Okay,
we-
sorry.
so
All right.
chill there. Why don't you
Sorry.
just hold that thought for a second? I think we have to go through process here.
Yeah, okay, got carried away.
Would it be all right if we open for public comment on items 1, 2, and 3?
You're the chairman, ma'am.
Chairperson.
Chairperson, excuse me. Yes, fine. Fine with me.
Why can't I get that through?
Works for me.
Something about old dogs learning.
I think that says I need to get the cattle prod out. All right. Is there anyone who would like to make comments from the public on the definitions and the motif display mooring that were just read by Mr. Hart? Great. Moving on to number 4, Round Cove Boat Ramp.
Okay. That's why we're here. This is a starting point for the Waterways Commission. This is, as you're going to find out, there's no real quick solution to this. So we wanted to at least have a starting point description, and it reads as follows. Round Cove Boat Ramp. The Round Cove Boat Ramp is limited in use to single-axle boat trailers only. with vessel maximum length overall of 20 feet and displaying a Harwich resident sticker for the launching and retrieving of vessels without obtaining a ramp use permit. For the purpose of this regulation, resident shall mean any lawful resident of the town and/or any Harwich property taxpayer or any current Harwich mooring permit holder. Vehicles not displaying a current Harwich resident beach or transfer station sticker must display a current Harwich seasonal ramp permit sticker on the trailer or Harwich mooring permit on the vehicle's dashboard. Due to the propensity for undermining the ramp foundation, power loading of boats and power loading and taking off the trailer shall be prohibited at the Round Cove boat ramp, and a sign will be posted at the ramp. The sign is there already. Parking shall be limited to the perimeter of the area and a full lane width as a fire lane in the parking area to the gangway at the bulkhead shall be maintained at all times. Vehicles or trailers blocking this lane will be subject to parking fines. Exemption for use of sticker requirement. Federal, state, county, and municipal government agencies, also commercial boat haulers and marine contractors. Enforcement. The provisions of this regulation may be enforced by the police officers, harbor masters, and assistant harbor masters. Violations of these regulations shall be issued to the vehicle owner and/or boat owner, and the fines may be assessed up to $200 per offense.
Ed?
Well, the first comment I have is in the last sentence above, where it's underlined exemptions from use sticker requirement. It says vehicles or trailers blocking this lane will be subject to parking fines. And given that in essence, you're blocking an emergency lane that's necessary to allow the fire department or the harbor master access to respond to emergencies. I think in addition to subject to parking fines, the vehicles and trailers should be subject to towing also, because you never know when you're going to have an emergency, and if they're blocking it, you're screwed.
I agree.
So I would make that addition.
And
So moved.
would you mind, what addition are you making again, Ed, after that long dissertation?
Vehicles or trailers blocking this lane will be subject to parking fines and towing.
And towing.
Second.
I'd like to make a comment. I think that there's some issues at Round Cove, and this, as Matt said, this was a first pass at it. I think we should understand that as the harbor master sees what's going on there and has other thoughts, we invite him to come back quickly to put in whatever language he now deems more beneficial. What Chatham is doing is giving out 40 permits, period, per day. And that's what's happening is it's driving people from Chatham to Round Cove and other places. This may not be enough is what I'm trying to say, so we should understand that John may be back.
And if that happens, we'll just have to have an additional public hearing
Yep.
if we're going to change it again.
That's fine, but as long as you,
Okay.
How often is anyone there now to enforce whatever we do?
Very seldom, but the harbor master can answer that better than I can.
I just want to know how practical this is. John, if you want to comment.
John Rendon, Harbor Master. Since the last Waterways meeting, I've been going in the mornings on the bass days, which is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Sunday I actually haven't been, but during the week. And, it's the landing is full as could be. There's parking along the road going up on Cove Road, making it difficult for two cars to pass. There's enough room for one car to come down, but the one at the bottom would have to wait. And then there's also parking out at the intersection outside of Wauquasit, that grassy knoll there, they're parking on there as well. So it's busy. And the trailers, some of them are large. You know, sometimes they disconnect the car from the trailer because they're sticking out too far, and then they park their car in a different location. So it's overtaxed, I would say.
Peter?
Is one of the issues that boats longer than 20 feet are being launched from that location?
There's no
No
limit
limit.
right now.
Yeah, so right now, if you could describe what the management plan allows at Round Cove, maybe that will help everybody understand what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to limit.
Well, right now, the ramp is open to anyone to put in. So there is no limit on boat size. There is no limit on 2 axles or single axle trailers.
There's no sticker
Significant
requirement.
size boats are putting in,
Yeah, no sticker
and
requirement.
no sticker requirement
So anybody on the planet, basically, who can get there can launch a boat.
currently.
Right. Now, how would we, with these new rules, if I could, Madam
Please,
Chair?
go ahead.
With this new section of the regulations in place, assuming we adopted them this evening, how would we go about advertising this or informing people what the new rules are? Other than you running down there in the morning and saying, no, you can't park here, see my new rules. I mean, there's got to be a way to do it, right?
Yeah, I need one more full-time staff on the Harbor Master's Department.
That's not going to happen, so
Okay,
we
next
go.
topic.
Started already.
All righty.
I'm going to work it. No, obviously signage would be important. We'd have to put signage up based upon, the regulations that we put in place. I think we'd have to advertise it, obviously, and we'd have to have presence down there. I'd
Man.
have to break some of my folks away to make random checks of the landing.
It occurs to me that,
That
I
was
mean,
my question.
assuming this would get voted in, that you just don't go down the next day and start issuing tickets. I think
That's
there has
correct.
to be some signage and some notice or something, so that people are at least are aware of the fact that they're violating the policy, if you will. So,
I would agree with that.
and is that something that, by, say, if it was approved today, that by the weekend, there'd be signage up, or is it 2 weeks from now, or how would that work?
Sure, I think within a week we could get signage up, yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone from the public would like to make a comment on the Round Cove recommendations?
Hello, Glenn Fernandez, Park Street. I'm a mooring holder in Round Cove. I keep a boat there. I've also got a mooring in Pleasant Bay. Both of those boats, I put them in and take them out at that Round Cove ramp. The one inside the cove is 23 feet and the one outside is 21. I'm a one-man show. I don't see why it would make sense for me to try to get a helper, figure out how to get to Riders Cove or Quonset Pond or somewhere else in the bay to put my boat in that I'm going to leave in Round Cove. I mean, this is Harwich's access to Pleasant Bay. I guess the other thing is once I put it in, it's not there for the season. I haul it out about once a week to fill the fuel tank. Buying gas at the marina is not part of my business plan. It just doesn't make any sense. And jugging gas, I don't think you're even allowed to jug gas, to be honest with you, and fill at the dock. I mean, people do it, but I don't think you're supposed to. Today at noon, I hauled my boat out and put gas. After I leave here, I'm going to go put it back in. And it's a 23-footer on a tandem axle trailer. So that's why I'm here. And there's a lot of other mooring holders. There's a lot of other boats. There's, 21 to maybe 30 feet. And mooring holders who are in Round Cove and in Pleasant Bay, I'm not sure exactly how many of them use that ramp to put their boats in and out, but I would think a significant number. I guess the other question I had was, I'm reading this and I'm not sure, I see this is about vehicles with trailers, and I don't know, is any of this about vehicles without trailers? when I read this, I don't see anything about a vehicle, like, say, my sister wants to come meet me at Round Cove with her kids, and she lives in Barnstable. Can she park, or does she have to hike in from Pleasant Bay Road? I just don't, I'm not sure, I'm not really clear on that. That's all the comments I got.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Hart or Mr. Rodon, would you, either one of you, Rendon, sorry, care to comment on those, particularly the car only? And if this gentleman was not allowed to take his boats in and out as 21 and 23 feet, I think he said, how else would he get access to Round Cove or to Pleasant Bay?
Well, I think he's got a great point, actually. And, I mean, there's other ramps, Crow's Pond, Riders Cove is limited. You know, obviously, you could go up to Nauset, which is not ideal, Nauset Inlet. It's a tough issue, and one of the things that maybe we should consider, although it really doesn't totally fix his problem, but it seems to me this issue really is surrounding this bass season. And the bass season is a very short period of time, relatively speaking. As Chatham does, their regulations are in place from July 6th through September 30th. And then Riders Cove goes back to just no restrictions. And they're doing that because, for obvious reasons. I mean, the rush of boats trying to put in because the bass are right outside the cut. And it may be something that we consider, that we go, instead of implementing this year-round, we look at a seasonal period where we're trying to, you know, address the congestion at the ramp that really is caused by the fishery. The condition of the ramp, I think nobody's really talked about that, but the condition of the ramp is a consideration as well. It's not that good of a ramp that can handle, you know, large-sized boats. 23-footer coming in and going, he doesn't have a problem with that. Whether you pick times of tides or not, I imagine those with bigger boats look at the tides and put in at the right state of tide, but it might be something we look at implementing it on a seasonal basis.
Is there any idea how many boats that are using this now that are beyond the 20-foot overall length that is in this proposal? And
I don't know, other than the small sample that I've taken the days that I've gone to look, and I would say probably more than half are larger trailers than 20-foot trailers. I don't know if you want to comment on that. You're there more than me. So.
I guess the one other thing, before I forget, was the whole part of just making it residents only can launch and haul boats there. The problem's solved. You know, I went down, I did my very unscientific study on Tuesday morning, which was a bass fishing day, and 2 of the trucks were from Connecticut, and it wasn't like they were second homeowners and they had a Harwich dump sticker or beach sticker. They were guys from Connecticut. There was a truck from Rhode Island, and there was a truck with a Mashpee transfer station sticker, and then there was 3 from Sandwich. None of them were Harwich residents. So I think even without this whole 20-foot thing, tandem axle trailer, just the whole making it residents only can launch there, then the problem is solved. So, and then I can't remember what you were asking me about, but I do have to haul my boat around the tide. I guess I don't have to, but I don't want to get my truck wet. So, like today, I went down there at 12:30, dead low tide, and then the truck doesn't have to get wet. I can just slide it right on, and I'm gone. And then tonight, I'll be putting it back in about 10:30 once the tide's going out. So, and then what were you saying? Oh,
Well,
how the size of the boats?
Bigger than 20 foot?
Yeah, there's a whole fleet of guys who have the same boat as me. It's a 23-foot Seacraft, and there's a few of them, but none of them are terribly big. You know, I haven't seen anything over 24, 25 feet going in and out of there. It's just you can't do it. It's just too difficult to back it in the ramp if there's other trailers parked there is just really hard to do. So you don't really see too many guys with bigger boats. And as far as what's out on moorings and stuff, I don't know. There's not a lot of boats over, I think the biggest boat in Round Cove is probably 30 feet.
Ed?
Before you sit down, so when you go to pick up your boat to fuel it, you're not parking there for any particular length of time.
It depends. Like, ideally, if tomorrow wasn't a bass fishing day, I would just go launch my boat tomorrow morning, and I would go fishing and just leave the truck and trailer in the parking lot. But anticipating it's going to be a zoo down there, I'd rather just put it on the mooring tonight, and then all I got to do is worry about parking my truck.
Okay.
So there's times when I'll if the tide's right, I might leave it there for the day. Instead of making 2 trips, it's easier.
Yeah, but what you do doesn't necessarily impact the parking availability.
Not too often. Usually I just leave it on the mooring, but I need to haul it out to. I put a lot of hours on it, so I got to do a lot of maintenance and fuel.
And I understand. Do you have a commercial bass license or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
There's not a lot of people really from the town of Harwich trying to make a living out of Round Cove.
Yeah.
There used to be when there was cohogs to be had, but kind of the only one left.
Sure. So the time of restricting it to the bass season is sort of the restriction is some of the time that you're particularly interested in.
Yeah, I mean I can work around it, and I can obviously see the parking issues down there, and I can see where people get upset with it was never a big deal for me, because if I'm there at 5 o'clock in the morning, nobody's there.
Mm-hmm.
If you show up at 11, you might have to hike in. There's nowhere to park. But I really think that most of these guys they're not residents. They're not even from the Outer Cape anywhere.
Okay.
It's a long boat ride from Falmouth or Bass River. It all started when the Southway filled in. You used to be able to go from Saquatucket and cut across and not have to go all the way down Chatham roads and around Monomoy. And that's when it all kind of started. And then Chatham kicked everybody out, and then it got really bad.
Just a question. If we were to restrict it just to the bass season,
Yep.
and then give people who have a mooring permit in Round Cove an exemption, would that cover what you need?
I think so.
Well,
I'm not sure.
I was really asking the harbor master.
Oh.
I think it would cover you. I thought I knew that answer.
After all that, could you repeat your question, please?
Maybe.
Please.
Well, I was wondering if we restricted it, as you suggested before, to just the bass season with those dates.
Right.
And plus allowed anyone, a holder of a Harwich mooring permit for Round Cove to be exempted. My guess is that's just a couple of people.
Well, anybody with in the case of Chatham, anybody who's a Chatham resident, they can come and go as they want. There's no restrictions on, specifically speaking for Chatham, that the only restriction was for non-residents.
Sorry.
So if we were to implement seasonal restrictions at Round Cove, would it impact, you're asking, would it impact Harwich residents?
No, what I was trying to do is figure out how somebody with a 23-foot boat moored in Round Cove
Yeah.
could be exempted.
Well, we know who are mooring permit holders in Round Cove, certainly.
So I was just trying to deal with the one situation that we had here, seeing that that's probably not the major cause of our problems.
Right. Well, that's true, I would say.
So if you just say residents only, does that solve the problem?
No, because the residents can get there, any resident can get there as long as their boat's under
I understand.
20 feet or under.
But it sounds like the problem
Yes.
are mainly boats that are not resident boats.
I'm just trying to deal with one particular issue.
Go ahead, Ed.
it appears that there are two issues. One is simply the volume and the restriction on residents only, or you have a mooring permit, or you have a seasonal trailer permit, is an attempt to control the volume. It's
Yes,
not just open to anybody. And the other problem seems to be the capacity of the ramp itself, and the sweet spot seems to be in around 23 feet. A single axle trailer is preferable, but clearly when you're up 27, 28 feet, it becomes much more problematic. So the question is, though, for someone like the gentleman who just spoke, who has a mooring permit in Round Cove or in Pleasant Bay, if we exempted those permit holders when they are launching or pulling their boats on those moorings, that they'd be exempted, would not present as a significant a problem.
A couple things. I think that's true. How you regulate that and how you monitor that is, a little challenging. I think enforcing that.
Sure.
And but I would say I think some of the problems we run into are these people who are coming strictly for the bass season. They go out fish, they come back and they haul out no matter the tide, and they're at certain states of tide. They're having to power up that ramp just to get their boat on their trailer, whereas people who have moorings in Round Cove and who come out of there every day, like this gentleman said, he pays attention to the tide, and he knows when to haul and when to put in. So
still going back to does it solve a chunk of the issue to just restrict this to residents? And not be as concerned about the size of the boat, and I'm just asking that, and taking a crack at just restricting it to residents and not so much worrying about the size of the boat? Because it sounds like it's the non-residents who aren't as cautious.
that may or may not be true. I think it's true that the ones who are cautious are the ones who know the ramp. Just because you're a Harwich resident doesn't mean you know the ramp or the body of water necessarily. So.
And I think initially the bigger boats we were concerned about tearing up the ramp. So it was a bit of an issue on
That's right.
Two different issues.
Ed?
They have exemption from use sticker requirement. Federal, state, county, and municipal government agencies, also commercial boat haulers, and marine contractors. So those classes of people would be exempt from having to have a sticker or be a resident or any of those classes. Would they also be exempt from the length limit?
I would think that they're exempt from this regulation, yes, sir.
Okay. And so a commercial boat hauler who's pulling a boat that's moored on a town mooring in Harwich, in Round Cove, or out in Pleasant Bay is exempt from the regulation, but the boat owner, if he's pulling it himself, not as a commercial hauler, he's not exempt, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It's the same boat. I'm just trying to find a rationale.
Again, I go back to, I think you got to give boat haulers a little credit and understanding,
Sure.
how to do it, when to do it, without tearing up the ramp. And the real problem is, I think these people who done fishing, come in, and they just want to get their boat on their trailer and go, and they're not paying attention to those types of issues, so. Sure.
If you go to the first paragraph, I think it answers one of your questions. It says, for purpose of this regulations, residents should mean any lawful resident of the town and/or any Harwich property taxpayer or any Harwich mooring permit holder. We're already taking care of them. For those, I think we ought to say, like we have in other harbors, 25 feet. That's not the problem. The problem are these other boats, just like it is in Chatham, that are here for the day. And as someone else said, there's a minor problem with the ramp there for maybe some things, but most of it are these during that period of the bass fishing. And what's compounded the problem is Chatham closed theirs, and we're the next one in line. So I think if you took this restriction and said, fine, it's mooring holders and anybody that's over 25 feet, you can't be in there. Now, if you want to change the tandem trail, I don't have a problem with that. I had a sailboat over there, and I couldn't have gotten it out of there with a single axle, and it was a 22-foot sailboat. So the tandem trailer, as long as you're exempting some things, I think you ought to exempt a lot of this from the Harwich mooring permit holder, for what Mr. McManus was saying, because then if they want to take it out on a Tuesday and put it back on a Wednesday, then they're covered anyhow. They're the same way that you'd have if you were a commercial hauler. I think what we have to focus on is where the problem is, and it's the larger trailers. And now what they're doing, they're also going on to the side of the ramp, and it's making it break off. And then when they're powering off and on, it undermines the ramp, and then you get a heavy boat and trailer, and there goes a piece of the ramp. What's happening here is we're penalizing our own residents, and even some of the neighbor residents that are good boaters, because of this unusual circumstance that happens every year. And you heard how Chatham resolved it. I think we have to find some way to restrict these non-residents and not penalize our own residents.
Peter?
It's great to have this debate, and there's a lot of good input here and whatnot, but, I think one of the worst things we do is try and set these policies and rules and regulations kind of on the fly, and I'm wondering if we would consider continuing this public hearing for 2 weeks, have them come back, let the harbor master go down, check out the area, come back with a proposal as to where he would put signs and what they might say, and maybe a little plot plan that shows what the parking area would be and refine the language. And then we can have a solid recommendation, because otherwise, if we don't do that, I think we'll be coming back to this in a couple of weeks because somebody didn't think about this or that, and that would be my recommendation.
Normally, I'd go along with what you're saying, Peter, except we're right in the middle of the bass season now. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's going on there now. Would there be a way to continue this, but allow this, even if we want to change it to 23 feet for a couple of weeks, to give? Because I'm just concerned at what's going on at Round Cove. That's my only concern. It's not, usually we can let something go for several weeks and there's no impact, but this is the bass season.
Madam Chairwoman,
Sir?
what Mr. Lamont is saying, at the waterways, we knew we couldn't come up with a total conclusion. What we wanted to do is come up with something that then the new harbor master could work with. The problem, as we just pointed out, if we postpone this, the bass season will be over. We're still going to have to deal with it in the future. So our idea was, let's put something in place. And my own personal opinion, I'd take out the tandem trailer, just say trailers, and go to 25 feet. And then they have something to regulate. And what we would do, as Mr. Hughes is suggesting, we've got to fine-tune this as we find a way to do this. What I'm amazed that there aren't residents here complaining. There's other problems that are really compounded there. And you've got vehicles parking where they shouldn't be. They're parking across the street. They're parking on both sides of Route 28. There's going to be a problem there. And we need to address that also, and that's what the harbor master is going to be looking into. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Larry?
In that regard, then, I would move we accept the recommendations on item 4 with the 2 modifications that we restrict the trailer.
I think we have to close
to-
the public hearing
okay.
first.
Close the public hearing, and we'll go.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, move we close the public hearing.
Okay, second. All those in favor? Any?
Aye.
Thank you. Now proceed.
I think we're done, though, now.
Did you change anything, or did you?
My motion.
closed the public hearing.
Okay, okay.
What I'm attempting to do, once we do that, is to move that we accept item 4 of your recommendations with the 2 changes of trailer only. In other words, delete the restriction to the tandem trailer, and we increase the length from 20 feet to 25 feet.
And that is a motion.
That's the motion.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd second the motion if we also added in the phrase after parking fines, subject to parking fines and towing.
Towing.
Yeah, sorry. I
And
forgot that.
also if we include approval of items 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Will you like to restate that motion, Larry, so it's all clear?
I'll never do it.
I move we accept items 1 through 4.
There we go.
1 through 3 as stated. 4, that we we delete the phrase tandem trailer. We extend the length to 20 feet, from 20 feet to 25 feet. After the phrase where it's, we can fine the cars up to $200 and or tow cars that are blocking the roadway. And what was the last one, Ed?
That's it.
That's it.
So that's it?
And I have one more if you want to add it.
And
Matt?
one more?
And that would be to have the harbor master provide us with a signage and parking plan within 2 weeks.
And have the harbor master, I'll get this out eventually. Harbor master provides with a sign and within 2 weeks, and plan within 2 weeks.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you,
and
Ed.
It's also, the second's done with the understanding that the typo and the minor grammatical change in item 3 is included. Yeah.
Thank you.
One thing I
Discussion.
think, just a little bit of discussion, I think we need to chat with Chief Mason about the parking situation, particularly along 28, about putting some extra enforcement up there. It's another way of getting it enforced.
Madam Chairwoman, can I ask one question?
You sure can.
As this is standing, I know it's a growing or living document as for the Round Cove. Are you suggesting this, right now, this is a year-round, or is this just seasonal?
I think we left it at year-round.
Okay,
You
just
have
right.
to year-round right now.
You
yeah.
can change it
It's
later.
fine.
This will get us started, Matt.
Thank you very much. Unless you have any other
further
questions.
discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work. All right, we welcome the Finance Committee here. We're having a joint discussion on the Monomoy High School building project. Finance Committee is here. And I think we're on a discussion, public comment, a possible vote. But I think that there's probably a lot more information to come before there's voting, in my opinion. Who would like to start? Skip, do you have a preference on how starting? Ooh, let's pass these down. Jim?
This is part of our economy move to save a few bucks on the microphones. I had thought at first it might begin with a discussion by the school committee about the building project. The Finance Committee has elected not to vote on this matter until after we have met with the MSBA, Massachusetts School Buildings Authority, on August 1st. And so we have not taken a position on the latest number, and we have not taken a position or a recommendation on the article. because we felt that this project was important enough that we should gather as much information as we could, and some of that information would be coming from the Mass School Buildings Authority. They're sending a policy level executive down here on August 1st for that purpose. So we're still in the information gathering mode, if you will. I mean, certainly there are ample opinions among the FinCom members and other members of both this community and Chatham, but they haven't coalesced around a recommendation yet.
Okay. I know that we have a letter from the Harwich Taxpayers Association. Are you planning on reading that to the public?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I have a presentation that I'd like to make, if I might. Before I start, I would like to just make a couple of comments. Number one, we're not dealing with the cost of the building because we don't have the expertise to do so. And I understand the FinCom is dealing with that issue, and that's the appropriate place for it. So that's not something that we are concerned about. I do have one concern, that if it comes to a vote this evening, that Mr. McManus recuse himself from voting. I respect the work he's done on the building committee. I think he's done a great job. He's obviously put in a lot of effort, and I believe the end result has benefit from his participation. However, I think that his independence with respect to this issue and the willingness to consider other alternatives or options is questionable, and I think he should, from that standpoint, recuse himself on the vote. There is some precedence for this. I recall a couple of years ago when Mr. Wilkins was on the board and at the same time was on the board of HESH. I believe it was Mr. McManus himself who strongly argued that Mr. Wilkins recuse himself on some issues that were in front of the board on HESH. So I would hope that that would be a consideration, and he would consider doing the right thing. I do have a presentation. I'd like to hand out copies to the members, and I believe I have enough copies. Staple screwed me up a little bit.
I would just, as you're passing that out, we have chatted with Town Council and the State Ethics Commission, and there has been no indication that Mr. McManus needs to recuse himself from voting on the Monomoy school debt.
I understand that there's certainly not a conflict of interest because there's no financial situation involved with respect to him, but I just request that he do so on the basis of independence and the ability to properly judge the issues that come before the committee.
Noted.
I have a couple of extra copies here if people would like them. I think it's important Dr. Cragen has one. Committee. I have one more here. We'll pass it around, perhaps. The first thing that I'd like to say is that something that others have said before me, and that is that there's no school building that ever educated a child. That the key is to have the proper teachers doing the job that they do so well, and I think it's been proven in the town of Harwich, as indicated by the choice numbers, despite the fact that we have a high school that everybody is playing down and turning on. The choice numbers show that the teachers are doing a good job, and the programs are such that the people are coming here. But what we're really talking about is a Plan B. We think that the new school could be voted down by either Harwich or Chatham, or both, for a couple of reasons. Most residents don't have school-age children. The value of schools on home values is perceived as minimal. I know that the Chamber of Commerce had done some studies in the past, but quite frankly, if you talk to a lot of people here, especially the seasonal people, they could care less about the schools. There's the shock value of a $65 million price tag, and excuse me, I rounded it up from 64.7 just to deal with round numbers. And the cost of the school and recent projected overrides add as much as an 18%. That's actually low. If you go to the following page, we have projected the tax increase over the next 4 years, starting with a base year of 2012. For 2013, there was a proposition 2.5, well, there's the 2.5% that seems to be automatic in the town. Plus, there was a $990,000 school override. In 2014, there's obviously going to be a 2.5% increase, and we understand from some folks on the Finance Committee that it is looking pretty good that there will be a projected school override of another $1.2 million, basically to make up for the money that was moved around in 2013. Now, obviously, that number is in question to some degree because there's no budget, no forecast at the school. So it's hard to say there is, and it's hard to say there isn't going to be a $1.2 million override. In 2015, there'll be another 2.5% increase, plus the school borrowing will be $410,000. That's a number that Mr. Ryan provided me, and that came from the bank, I believe. And in 2016, another 2.5% increase and a $2,069,000 borrowing cost. So the total increase for the years 2013 through 2016 is 23.6% increase in property taxes. And that excludes any other capital items that might be, capital exclusion items that might be there. It excludes anything related to the harbors. It excludes anything related to wastewater. Now, I know the comment's been made that things are coming off the debt rolls as they're being paid off so that there's room for this, and that's ridiculous. Just because something's coming off doesn't mean it has to be replaced. And number two, it doesn't take into consideration the significant costs that we have in front of us to deal with. So, you know, it's a 24% increase. The other reason for having a Plan B, and this is what I'll spend my time on, is that we have sufficient assets already available to take care of the needs of the high school without adding a new high school. The school capacity numbers in Chatham, and this is per the design partnership, these are not our numbers. The middle school is 408, the high school is 550 for a total of 958. And the Harwich Middle School, per the Mount Vernon group, shows a middle school capacity of 534. Now, we understand that there's some scheduling issues, so the educational capacity of the schools in Chatham, if that were to be the combined high school, would be 85%, so 85% of 958 is 814 students. In Harwich, the middle school, and because the middle school doesn't have as many scheduling issues, I suppose, it's 90%, so that brings it down to 480 students. So we have capacity between the two schools of 1,294 students from the middle and high school. On the next page, we've got the projected grade 8 through 12 enrollment from, this was the MSBA projections. It shows that we have certain capacities, but interestingly, those are lower than our projections of what the enrollment will be through 2016. On the following page, we've taken the actual 2012 enrollment by grade, and we moved everybody up a year so we could get out through 2016. And we show the capacity for the 8 through 12 as a high of 765 in 2016, and the middle high school over in Chatham with a capacity of 814. We've done the same thing for the middle school, and we show a high of 477 students in 2016 with a capacity of 480. We also understand, and we haven't attempted to do anything with respect to this, but that in terms of the elementary schools, the Harwich elementary schools are over capacity, and the Chatham elementary schools are under capacity. So there's an issue there that's going to have to be dealt with, I suspect, in order to even that out somehow. So what we're recommending is that the Chatham Middle High School become the regional high school, and that the Harwich Middle School become the regional middle school. Now the question is, why hasn't this been taken into consideration? Well, obviously the needs study that was done a number of years ago looked at only Harwich schools and decided that there was in fact a need for a new high school. At the time the regionalization was approved, the only thing that went forward was a new high school. Now we did look at the information that Dr. Cragen provided us with respect to this issue, and the only thing that we could find in all the information that was given us, which wasn't all we asked for, but it was what was given us, was a comment on the February 26, 2010 minutes from the Chatham-Harwich Regional Planning Board, which indicated that Dr. Cragen and Dr. Lanzo will look into the capacity of each of their schools relative to regionalization. As far as we can tell, that was not done, at least not with respect with the concept of making Chatham Middle High School a regional high school and the Chatham Middle School the regional middle school. We also understand, and we've seen some projections, that if you look out at the total seats that are available in the two towns, there is an excess capacity of right now of almost 200 seats. So we've got excess capacity right now if you just look at it in raw numbers, and that would take into account the elementary schools as well. And thus we have to ask ourselves, why are we building a school to add 700 seats when we already have an overcapacity of 200, and that excludes the high school, the current Harwich High School. What we suggest is next steps, to the extent that we can do it. Obviously, curriculum needs need to be factored into the capacity numbers. We understand, we don't know enough about education ourselves. We have somebody on our executive committee who does, and this is a point that they made, that there are certain curriculum needs which will affect the capacity numbers, and those need to be taken into consideration. Obviously, there's some costs that may need to be determined to bring the schools up to current needs. We suspect that at least the technology costs at the Chatham Middle High School might be $3 to $5 million, but that's a small number compared to the $34 million or thereabouts that the Chatham and Harwich taxpayers will be asked to spend on a new high school. We also believe that the MSBA should be asked if they would reimburse any costs necessary to convert the current schools. If it costs $10 million and they're willing to give us already $30 million, why wouldn't they go the less expensive route if that worked out? I don't know why anybody is rushing to spend $4 million to get $30 million. It's kind of like my wife going to a half-price sale and coming home and saying she saved so much it paid for what she bought. It's good money chasing bad. We think that the taxpayers should be given the opportunity to review Plan B and come to their own conclusions. It's unfortunate that this whole process has been so rushed. There's been very little communication. There's been no alternative provided. It's been argued that if we don't do this, we'll never get the money again. We'll never get in line again. We're going to lose out on this money. It's our money anyway. It's a lot of scare tactics, and I think that it's inappropriate. We're making a major investment, and we should take our time and do it. And if that means delaying for a year the building of the school, if that's where we come out, then I think that that's the best way to go. We also need to consider repurposing the current Harwich High School property. We've got a valuable piece of property there. If we tear down the school, we've got many acres that are sitting there that can be sold off, can be developed, can be put on the tax rolls. Lots of things can be done there. So I think that is something that also ought to be brought into the consideration. But we need to get realistic about this project, and I don't think we are. I think we're rushing it. We're rushing forward to spend, to build a $65 million school that we may not need. We're rushing forward to spend $34 million in the town of, or excuse me, $25 million in the town of Harwich that we may not need to do. Perhaps, you know, if we go through all this and we find that we can do the whole thing and get everything we want for $15 million, and even if that's not reimbursed by MSBA, it saves us, my math is correct, $19 million, which is a lot of money. But I keep coming back to the fact that we're talking about a 24% increase in real estate taxes over the next 4 years. And if, you know, we keep going and saying, well, this is $130 or $160 or whatever it is for a median home, that's misleading. We're talking with everything that's built in right now that we know about, it's a 24% increase. And most people in town cannot afford that. I can't afford it. So I think that I'd like to see us sit back, look at Plan B, give it consideration, go through the process, and rather than rush into only one alternative and scare people into trying to support that. Thank you.
Comments on that? It's an interesting proposal. Anybody have any questions or comments?
This is a lively group tonight.
Yes. And it would also be a good idea to hear from the schools. Pete?
I come from a different perspective. I think everybody in the room recognizes that we have to address the school needs the physical plant. The real question is timing. We have here, in this proposal, we have strong political support. We have, I guess it's close to 5 years of development. We have architects, lawyers, engineers. We have the students that are in favor. It is not the time to reassess and talk about other possibilities and throw numbers out that have no substance. We know what the numbers are on this. We have to deal, I think, very similar to the discussion that we had quite a while ago on the expansion of the new police station, and I was very much against a lot of the individual parts of that. However, at the time, I stood back and I looked at the bigger picture and I said, you know, we have to face up to it. The economics were right. We had low interest rates, low construction costs. We're facing the same thing right now. I think that we cannot afford to delay. I think we have to move ahead. It's the right thing to do, and I am in full support of the project. I think that in the future, the Finance Committee in particular will continue to review the costing to look at whether we're saving money where we can. We're not talking about a firm number. We're talking about a cap. And hopefully, with prodding from Skip, who has done a hell of a job of looking at all the numbers, that we can realize some savings. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is to move ahead with this project, which is a good one. Thank you.
Sir?
May I respond to that? First of all, Mr. Watson, I'm not sure when you say that numbers that are I think you said unconfirmed, or these aren't my numbers. These are the numbers that were put forth by professional groups that were hired by the school, the capacity numbers. It's an easy numbers game. It's not, hide and seek, number one. Number two, if you feel that even though we have the capacity to use the existing facilities, that we should go out and spend up to, and I'll give you the up to, $65 million, then I don't think you should be a member of the Finance Committee, because I don't think you're looking at it from the taxpayer standpoint. I think that we need something, that we need a facility. I don't disagree with that. But as I said in the beginning, there's no school building that ever educated a child. You can go to New York and go to the Bronx, and you can see some of these magnet schools there that are in the middle of nowhere with no facilities, in the middle of, I say nowhere, the middle of dangerous areas with no facilities, and they're some of the best schools in the country. So I don't think it is wise to say that we should go out and spend this money at this point if we don't need to, because most people in this town cannot afford a 24% increase in their real estate taxes. In fact, what it will do is drive out the young people who have the kids. So we're going to be working against ourselves with respect to that. So I think, yes, it's late in the game, but that's not because of us. That's because the way it was never reviewed. The decision to look at a plan B and an alternative was never made. It was, let's drive for the new school. And, if it's not your money, it's easy to spend, which our government finds. So I just think that we have to look at a plan B. We have to take the time, because we're spending the taxpayers' money.
I think I was up next. Thanks. I can't remember the last time that I disagreed with Pete Watson, and I will probably regret what I am about to say, but I feel compelled to say it nonetheless. We currently have, by numbers received from the same reports that Jeff was mentioning, plus from Dr. Cragen's office, we have 343 empty seats in our inventory. If you blow away the high school, the Harwich High School, 343 empty seats. I find that it strains credibility to discuss building another 700 seats that will add approximately 250 new empty seats. It just is, to me, beyond imagination that one would go ahead and do something like that. So, while it is late in the game isn't over. Maybe it has to go into overtime. But I believe that should we ever be able to realize the synergies of regionalization, and by the way, I think everybody, at least on the Finance Committee, is very much in favor of regionalization for the educational benefits that it offers, for the future of both Chatham and Harwich school systems, that I don't think they could survive much longer on their own. So that's not the issue. The issue before us really is a building that is not needed and is far more than what we can really afford to pay. So the idea of winding up after building such a building with over 600 empty seats defies any logic that I ever learned. And I have to confess I did not learn the new logic that might take me away from that position.
Ed, and then Pam.
Well, a couple of things. I've looked at the same documents that were provided to the Taxpayers Association on school capacity. And it's interesting to note that to get to a total of 958 student capacity, it's actually not a student capacity. What it is the number of seats. They went through the library and they counted up every seat in the library. And they went into the dark room and they counted up that they could have 14 students in the dark room. And they went through every classroom and they assigned 25 students to every classroom. In neither Chatham nor Harwich have we ever approached over 20 students as an acceptable educational level in our classrooms. Most parents, if they wanted to put their students in a school that had a number of 25 per classroom, they would have moved to Taunton or Fall River or New Bedford, because that's what you're looking at. We moved to Harwich and Chatham because we have lower class sizes. You know, and you don't run a school with 14 students in the dark room every minute that the school's open, with 64 students in the. That's the only way you get to these capacity numbers, and they're just. It's simply. It's a seating capacity, the number of seats. Do you count? The only seats that they left out were the seats in the waiting room in the principal's office. They didn't count those. But, I mean, you could put 6 more students in those seats. But that's the ridiculousness of this as anything approaching an actual educationally valid assertion. Now, I've been involved in looking at replacing the high school facility or improving the high school facility since the school committee received the Dorr and Whittier plan in 2004 and met with the 2 members of the school committee at that time, the superintendent at that time. We looked at that plan. It laid out some alternatives between renovating the school or building a new one. Being a historic preservationist, I was much more in favor of renovating the school. I sat through as the board's liaison to the Building Needs Committee and went through all of the review that committee did, and slowly over the months finally came to the conclusion that no matter how much I felt strongly about historic preservation, Harwich High School was not a building to be preserved, to serve an adequate educational need and purpose in this time. It would never cut it. As we moved through that process, the issue of regionalizing came up, and that was the number one recommendation of that committee. That committee was originally asked to look at regionalization and sort of thought it was initially a throwaway request, but as they went through the process, they became more and more convinced that building a new high school in a regional context with a neighboring partner like Chatham was the number one preferred alternative. The second preferred alternative was, if it was Harwich alone, would be to put up a new middle school, high school. Based on that, they made an application to MSBA, and MSBA basically said, we're going to put you in a new category, one of regional study, and you need to look at your regional options before we'll consider your application any further. And in doing that, we began the process of regional study with Chatham. We formed a two-town regional study committee that 3 individuals from each town sat on. They reviewed the educational plans. It was basically, in many ways, looking at the educational soundness of combining the 2 school systems, but also always an issue was Harwich's facility needs. And as that process went through, the decision was made to form a new region. We took it to town meeting. The vote was a little bit close in Chatham, but it was overwhelmingly in favor of forming a region in Harwich, some 850 to 22. And I think in all cases, both at the town meeting in Chatham and in Harwich, if anybody thinks that the major intent of one of the major intents of the regional agreement that was approved, and a major intent of the people voting in that room, was to build a new high school. And the region was formed, continuing work with MSBA. They came and looked. Through that process, I know you can ask Jack Brown, who was involved in the regional study committee. I kept on suggesting that one of the regional combinations you need to look at was what was being suggested tonight. The looking at using the 2 Harwich Middle School and the Chatham High School Middle School facilities as the future facilities for the new regional school district. That was an issue that was reviewed by MSBA when they came down. MSBA, you don't get to anymore apply to the state and say, we have a problem here and this is our solution, fund us. You go in and you say, we have a problem here, and they say, okay, what are your possibilities? And they walk you through your possibilities. And they tell you which one they're going to fund and which one they feel provides the adequate educational program and educational future for your community. And they rejected the plan of reusing the 2 facilities in favor of a plan of building a new high school. An 8 through 12 high school, which was the wrinkle that was upsetting at the last minute, but people seem to accept that. And I think, I've been through most of these considerations and been convinced that, you could potentially possibly do it, but you would wind up with a much less of an educational facility and a much less of an educational opportunity for our students. And I don't think anybody voted for regionalization to make things worse for our students. They voted for it to make things better. And I think moving ahead, as Mr. Watson indicated, is the right thing to do.
Skip, could I ask you to move that microphone over to that end of the table? Because I think Pam is next.
May I just comment on that?
No, I'm going to order you.
Oh,
I'm going to order
you're
it.
brave.
Madam
Thank
Chair?
you.
Madam Chair, may I just comment on Mr. McManus's comments?
No, first we're going to hear from Pam.
Thank you. I'd like to bring this back to the original discussion, which is basically the appropriateness of the numbers that are being used here this evening. The number of seats really doesn't equate unless those seats are appropriate for the educational plan that has been set forth for our high school students, our high school and our junior high school and middle school students. We have curriculum coordinators who have worked very closely with the MSBA We are under the gun from the state because our high school facility is not up to educational standards, and as such we have a warning label that has been hanging over our heads. The only reason the hammer has not fallen right now is because we have made a promise to the state that we will rectify our facility situation. The discussions on how it's going to be rectified have been held in many open meetings in both towns. So the fact that using the other schools has not been put on the table before really is not correct, Jeff. I mean, it has
No
been
public
talked.
record of it.
Well, you know, I hate to say this, but I know nobody wants to hear past history. I was on the facilities committee when I was on the school board in the 1990s. And even back then, we were told that we had to change our approach. Education needs to come first, and that the high school was deteriorating and was starting to affect the quality of the education. It has taken us 20 years to get to this point. We are regionalized. That is a fact. That is something that stands and will stand for 10 years, regardless of how we build, what we build, and where we build it. So the question before us now is the project that is on the table and whether or not the price tag that is attached to it is something that is appropriate. I feel that it is. I know it's high, but going back, when we were told that we, at that point, could build a new high school for $40 million, or we could renovate it, and I believe the cost for the renovation was in excess of $25 million. That's without state aid. Well, here we are now with state aid, and we're at $25 million. If we were to use Chatham, A, we don't know if Chatham is willing to do this. B, Chatham is a junior senior high school. It is not appropriate for use as just a high school or just a middle school. There would have to be significant renovations to that building. The same would happen with our middle school. That would have to be retrofitted as well. So you're adding costs. You're taking away from one end and you're adding them on to the other. I really would like to see us come back. Plan B should have been on the table if it was truly something that was of concern. It should have been put on the table 18 months ago. We are down to the wire now, and I feel we have an obligation to do what is right for the students in both towns, and that is to move forward with a plan for a new school that is palatable to all of us.
Okay, thank you, Pam. I'm going to ask Mr. Gunderson to speak because he's been standing there. And
I'd
you've
just
had...
like to respond to a couple of comments that were made because I
Okay,
think the
and then Mr. Gunderson.
Then Mr. Gunderson?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, we do make a comment that the capacities need to be looked at based on curriculum. So we're not disagreeing with that. Number two, I don't understand how the Chatham Middle High School would need to be retrofitted if it was a high school, but not if you're going the other way. It's going to be a middle school. You mean the high school facilities are sufficient for middle school. And number two, the middle school is already a middle school, so if you move the Chatham middle school students to Harwich, why would that need any work? I mean, it's a middle school. So I don't agree with that. Mr. McManus made some comments about the process that all this has gone through, and certainly the process when we were standalone was such that you would only look at Harwich schools. I understand that. Now that we are regional, the concept needs to be looked at of the combined school. Now, you say it was done. There's no public record of it. Okay, there's one public record, and that's the comment that I indicate in here about it was going to be done, and there's nothing else with respect to that. So if it was done and there's a public record, I made a Freedom of Information request Haven't gotten anything on it. So if it's there, fine, but to my knowledge, it's not there. With that, I'll yield to Mr. Gunderson.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson.
Thank you. My name is Richard Gunderson from Harwich. I'm a late comer to this whole issue, and I can't go back in history like some others that have commented tonight before me, but I still don't understand why it's so impossible to go back and assess a reasonable approach to saving millions. You know, this generally, when you listen to the TV or the radio these days, they talk about the debt that this country is in. So I can talk about that because I'm 66 years old. I know what debt is. That's what we're getting into. This is another thing that we're going to be passing on to our children. You're talking about education? Well, this is maybe unnecessary debt that your kids are going to have to pay, and my kids are going to have to pay, and I'm going to have to pay. This seems like a very viable alternative. I don't know why it wasn't looked at. I think the people should be embarrassed who should have done it a more thorough job or raised it. If Ed says he raised it, he should have followed up on it and kill it if it's killable. But I didn't hear that it was ever killed. You can talk about curriculum, but just look at the 4 walls, the square foot space, the number of classrooms. If you need a science wing or a larger auditorium, you can add on to these buildings. I lived for 55 years in Milton. We added a science wing while the schools were in process. It can be done for a lot less than tearing down or building a new school. MSBA offers funding reimbursement for renovations and additions. Sure, you'd have to go back at the end of the line. Your requirements are still there. Your political force is still there. Your need is still there. There's a lot of your application process that is still existing. I really think this conversation should be had in seriousness on August 1st with the MSBA authorities when they come here, because it seems to be a lot of innuendos and misrepresentations that are still floating around. The fact that somebody can say that in 2003 there was a study that determined it would be a $25 million cost to build a new high school in Harwich and that we'd have to go it alone for that, I find that amazing. I mean, even today, you might have to wait 2 years, you might have to apply, you might have to have a need, but you'd still get some subsidy. So I really think we're comparing apples and oranges here, and that's done continually in the press. Sorry about that, Mr. Wood, but it's done continually in the press. I really think the Plan B should be examined much more closely if this vote is turned down in either one of the towns. As someone who just was reported in the paper said, if not this, then what? Well, we better have a what. Thank you.
Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good questions need good answers, and I hope we get a good audience out there to follow along in this discussion. I can't speak to what the existing documentation is, but having been pretty intimately involved with this process at school committee level, building committee level, curriculum committee, et cetera, for an extended period of time, I don't believe that the agreed upon educational plan that the regionalization task force put together on the high school level, since that's my expertise, can be done in that facility. As has already been pointed out by several people, so I won't go into the details of it, looking at the number of people who fit in a building is not the same as looking at what the educational activities within the building, what educational activities can be supported by the building. Just one example. One of the issues that we've grappled with, both Chatham and Harwich and now Monomoy, is school choice. And one of the biggest issues with school choice is what the schools offer. The number of electives, the number of foreign languages, the number of sports that are offered, the number of advanced placement classes. all of those things require extra space, and especially on something like advanced placement classes, it usually means having to have more specific sections of that subject area, which requires smaller classes. You can't schedule that in by looking at the number of spaces in a classroom or in a library. So it's not a bad thing to run through those numbers and to examine those numbers and to look at the agreed upon educational plan that the MSBA has been using as their basis of analysis. But having been involved in that process, I don't see how that works. The athletic facilities down at the Chatham end of things. I mean, if our two big competitors, whether we like it or not, are now DY from the Mashpee border up to our border here in Harwich, and Nauset, the rest of the Cape, go look at those facilities. Go look at what they offer. Go look at what their athletic facilities allow them to offer. Talk to people who've left the schools in both Chatham and Harwich and ask them why they've left. And go see which programs they are participating in. Go back over the last 10 years of what the financial cost of that choice has been. Wonder through your mind what the impact is going to be when the news hits that Harwich is placed on probation. And it's not just Harwich that's going to face the consequences of being placed on probation. The budgetary impact of being placed on probation is going to hit Chatham as well. And you can figure that out pretty clearly for obvious reasons. Those are the things that we have to keep in mind. I would also put it in this perspective. Some of you have been around long enough to remember this. In the capital plan, the money for the new school or the renovation of the high school was in the plan before the police department was. The school department and the superintendent voluntarily stepped aside to accelerate the police department project. Anyone else remember that? There's been in the capital plan. We have capital planning committee members here. The money for this project has been in the capital plan for years. If my memory is working, I think back in 2006, there was 2 line items in the capital plan totaling almost $20 million back in 2006. $25 million for Harwich's share for a state-of-the-art facility that will be in a tremendous position to compete with our 2 regional bookends. We're in a unique geographic situation. People in Harwich know that because as we've wrestled with school choice, the unique geographic situation that Harwich is in with Chatham and the 2 regional school districts has been why we've wrestled with choice over such a long period of time. We have to put this project not just in what will suffice or that we can squeeze into or that we might get by with, because the long-term implications of that with school choice, in my opinion, will be devastating. It's the school system's time. And if you look at those numbers over the last decade, I think although people have been at other public forums where I've spoken, I don't want to spend money that we don't have to spend. Other people at this meeting today have heard me mention specific things that are currently in the $64.7 million. That might change over time. I don't want that money spent, the contingency money, that doesn't have to be spent. But it's time to, in my opinion, to move ahead with this project, keeping in mind the concerns that all of us have about minimizing what the cost will be. But I think it's at this stage we need to move ahead. On the budgeting issue and on the tax rate, I would just hope at some point during the evening if Dave Ryan could comment on, as we were going through the regionalization discussion, there were projections made over a 5-year period, both on an operational basis and on a capital basis. So I was hoping that we could get some commentary on some of the impact on that, with things coming off the capital expenses and things coming on, as to what that 24% increase in the tax rate, if it doesn't have to be now, but at some point through the evening you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Cragen and then Mr. Larios.
Thank you. Mr. Houston has said much of what needed to be said, and I think it's important to return to the discussion of the project at hand. So rather than engage in debate, although I would be tempted, I'd like to just provide some information that may help people who have made a well-intended proposal recognize the fact that it has already been addressed. I actually have with me some things from the archives, and as Mr. McManus mentioned earlier, on March 11th in 2009, the Building Needs Committee issued its report, and it's an extensive report. I think it was about 50 pages. Under its finding for regionalization, the overview was that regionalization with another school district offers the potential to create a strong, sustainable regional school district, provided both districts are well matched and share a commitment to significant educational values for student achievement and personal development. Because regionalization offers limited fiscal advantages and sacrifices independence and local character, however, any regionalization plan must compensate for these issues by providing enhanced educational opportunities for Harwich children. The following page offers the Plan A and the Plan B that Mr. McManus mentioned, of regionalization being the preferred option and middle senior high school for Harwich being the backup option. Now, for the information that I can provide for people who are wondering why we didn't shuffle the student population into the existing facilities. In April of 2011, after the region was established officially by the state, MSBA requested from us, and I spent a significant amount of the spring providing the data to them, the information about the existing facilities. One of the things that I think is important, and we probably don't say it often enough, is that from the perspective of fiscal responsibility and providing the appropriate educational facilities without expanding into edifice complex, I believe I read recently, MSBA is a very frugal partner. And the first thing that MSBA does in looking at a region, and this was the case last April with what was then almost Monomoy, I think we were still the Chatham-Harwich region at that moment, was to very carefully go over all of the space available in all of the buildings. And if those buildings had provided, in MSBA's estimation, a reasonable option other than building a new high school, they would not have gone forward with the proposal for the model school. So it has indeed been addressed both in the discussions at the Regional Planning Board, and that was a relatively short discussion because the facilities really just don't fit in an appropriate way the kinds of programs and student needs that this region or any 2,000 student district would have. But beyond that, the state agency that is tasked with ensuring that the appropriate number of dollars are spent for the appropriate facilities in any district in the state has looked at the numbers and has found the regional high school to be the appropriate solution to the problem that we brought to them. We don't have the option, nor would we recommend it, of going to them with another recommendation and asking for state funding. The state proposal is the proposal that you have before you for the model high school.
I have one question for you, Dr. Cragen, which is the comment was made that the probation would impact the budget if our high school was put on probation. Could you explain that to the particularly the television audience, as to what that impact would be? I mean, obviously, if we're put on probation, that's a problem. But how does that impact the budget?
To be honest with you, it's hard to imagine. The probation would require us to find a way to meet the needs that were demonstrated by the Harwich High School facility in the NEASC evaluation and the assessment that we were given on October 1st of 2007 that put us in the warning category. As Mrs. Groswell mentioned, the only reason that we haven't already landed in probation is that there was documentation that the problems were being addressed. I guess in terms of budget, we would have to find other ways and other costs that would be necessary to bring Harwich High School into a place where it could be considered appropriate in order to get out of probation. And to be honest with you, I doubt that would be a viable option beyond, rebuilding the high school. And we know that's not an economic option.
I just want to follow up Dr. Fragan quickly.
Okay.
Can I follow up a question with Dr. Fragan?
Well, Rich was next.
Go ahead.
Rich? Yes?
That's enough.
Angela just said that's enough.
That's enough. And I'm
Pull
sitting
that
here.
closer, please, so that, make sure it picks up your voice. Thank you.
Okay. It's sitting here. It becomes a bit frustrating to understand the matter of priorities we're going through. The gentleman talked about the capital plan and about the police station and about the school and so forth. I guess you can categorize matter of priorities. Public safety is kind of important, and so is education, and whoever are the decision makers then went with the police station. I'm really tired. Well, we spent the whole day together, but I'm really tired and frustrated about going back historically about what we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago to get where we are today, okay? The train is derailed as far as I'm concerned. And I'm really concerned from sitting on the Finance Committee and sitting on the Capital Outlay Committee that in a fiduciary sense that we've taken on by our own willingness, our voters voted yes for regionalization, and it was a strong regionalization, and they understood certain things, and they understood certain dollars. That's what I understood. The second thing happened is they understood the dollars, and the dollars are very big, real big, and some of them can't deal with these big dollars. And I asked when I think we sat 2 weeks ago with the school committee and the building committee about, is there an alternative? No, because regionalization didn't give you an opportunity to look at a plan B. That wasn't the charge. The charge was to look at regionalization. But yet, somebody's come up and said, yeah, there was a plan B, or there could be a plan B, and I think our taxpayers and the people who are going to vote again sort of would ask the question, is there a plan B? And bigger question is, what if we can't afford it? Nobody said, suppose you can't afford it. We've gone through the whole mechanism. We're 99% there. We've seen the big dollars. We've seen 1.4 million gone down to 1.2 million, and we've talked about this on the bus today. We're eliminating this and eliminating that, and we finally came down to a lower number. But what if you can't afford it? What if we become like, San Bernardino, California, and another place in California, and Ed, you're from California, and you become bankrupt? Or what happens if we become a Scranton or a Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where we have to take our teachers and our public safety people and pay them minimum wage just to keep them working? I've got a real problem with that. So I think we deserve, I understand that the time is running out, but I think we deserve, maybe not this plan B, but this is certainly a plan B to start with, but I think somebody should be looking at, and maybe the Finance Committee or maybe the Capital Outlay Committee, should be looking at an alternative that what happens if we can't afford it. And that's all I got to say. Thanks.
Larry?
I actually had a question with Dr. Cragen because while you're up. And
Larry, can you speak into, grab a mic?
Don't
Thanks,
be
Ed.
bashful, Larry.
Regarding Plan B, whatever that Plan B may be, you seem to infer that the MSBA would take has taken or does take a proactive stance, and they would explore all possible plans on their initiative without our initiative. I actually find that a little surprising from a government agency, but that they would do that. But that's what is that correct? That they would, so in essence, you're saying that they've already considered these types of plans because, my memory is our discussion of the middle high school was Harwich oriented when we were trying to get to the 700.
That's
it
correct.
wasn't Harwich Chatham.
That's correct. The MSBA, when it crunches the numbers based on the facilities, if they felt that there was a way to use the existing facilities to address the problem, and the problem was Harwich High School. So by the time those numbers were submitted in April of 2011, we were already Monomoy. So they were looking at the existing buildings in Monomoy, and they were looking at the space available. They were looking at the enrollment projections that ultimately, you'll recall, they certified us at 700 for the high school last August. They would have said to us, we can't reasonably invest in a new high school because the facilities that you have could appropriately address the educational needs of the students with, say, a renovation expansion on one of the buildings. That's their process, is to say, you bring us the problem, we'll suggest to you based on our expertise and our willingness to fund in a conservative way what the best investment of those state dollars will be.
Okay, thank you. If I may continue with
Please.
just another, probably more of a comment, but my concern is that I don't think we'd be having this in-depth discussion if the price tag had not jumped up so much from when it first initiated to where it is now, where we've gone up from initially 39 million, then 55, now 65. And my frustration is that there seems to be it's difficult to get answers on why that went up. The response always wants to come back to a net increase. In other words, look at only Harwich taxpayer money and not the total cost. For me, we should be doing all we can to be fiscally responsible with the total cost, because that, after all, is all taxpayer money, maybe not locally. And then once we do that, then we work our tails off to get as much state aid as we can, which we've done. And what drives my concern on that, as I've said, past meetings, is that we're outside the range of what other schools are billing. In several measures: square foot per student, cost per student, total cost per student, and somehow, for me at least, and people I talk to, we need to explain why we're outside the norm. And I know Ed's tried to help with a couple, hurricane windows versus non-hurricane windows. That helps a little bit, but that's a large range. When you look at this table that Skip's put together, and we need to explain to our taxpayers, because we need to pass this if we move forward, of why that's so. Both the total cost and then the net cost. And just to add to that, by refusing to have that discussion, we're actually, I think, muddying the waters. People are getting really confused between the total cost and the net cost. We'd be better off trying to come out with straightforward answers and explain that, because we're not going anywhere now. And I think we all are. It's the reason we keep pressing this point. Can we afford it? And which is an interesting question, since we all agree that we need to move ahead. And by the way, Jeff, I do disagree with the aspect that because people are retired or seniors, they don't care about education or visitors. I think everyone feels an obligation to, educate our kids. That's not the issue.
Sir.
Madam Chair, person, and selectmen and guests, I'm Jack McDowell, 9 Wheelock. I guess I'm trying to understand what a $29 million anchor looks like. Because I think the state has trapped us with this number. Yes, regionalization is a wonderful thing because of what it allows us to do for our children. If I gave the superintendent $29 million and said, you have Chatham High School and Middle School, and you have Harwich Middle School, tell me how you're going to spend that money on teachers and programs to attract and retain students. I'll bet there'd be a way to do it. We have capacity if someone creatively wants to figure out how to use it. It does not appear there's been any real creative thinking about how to use our existing capacity. Everybody falls back on the MSBA says this is what you have to do. We have an obligation to say to them, we can do this given these parameters. Yes, if we have to spend 10, 15, 20 million dollars between the two towns to add to our capacity to get exactly what we need, let's do it. But why this large number? Why this freight train that's been running at each and every one of us for the last year as the only alternative that we have? Folks, we have another alternative if we're willing to look at it, to create programs and compensate teachers properly. If our total taxes go up 25% over the next few years, guess how much money is going to be left for fire, police, public employees? Because they certainly deserve and will require increases in salary also. They could get clobbered by the fact that there aren't adequate funds to compensate them because we're putting it into the school system. We need balance. We don't have that balance today. We cannot even get what the school budget is going to look like for the next 3 to 5 years. That could be another anchor around our necks. Folks, there's a 25% probability that this thing is going to get voted down, either at the ballot or at town meeting by these two communities. So you better have a plan B. You better have numbers for it, because the reality is one of these things is going to get shut down, and you're going to have a real major problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dykens.
Madam Chairperson, thank you so much. I don't want to have a prolonged debate this evening, but I do take issue with some of the prior speakers' comments. This isn't Plan B. This isn't Plan C. This isn't Plan D. It's Plan D, E, or F. We had a Plan A back in you had a Plan A back in 2003 when you looked at rehabbing this high school, and you found that you were going to do that at $25 million. You roll that forward with some inflation factor. That's going to be in the 30s. That's Plan A. Plan B was, hey, 2009, let's have our building committee take a look at that high school. You know it's no good. You got to rehab it. You got to do something with that high school under sanction. You took a look at it. Going it alone, middle school, high school, $40-some-odd million. $40-some-odd million. That's Plan B. Plan C has been in the work for 3 years. I take issue with folks that say we haven't thought about this, haven't planned it, haven't been circumspect and thoughtful. There have been people working on this plan for 3 years. Town of Chatham voted for this plan. In our regional agreement, in our partnership with the town of Harwich, it says in our regional agreement, we will with all due alacrity, build a new high school in Harwich on the current, with the full intent with this agreement is to build a high school in Harwich with all due alacrity. The town of Chatham's contributing the middle school, high school for a state-of-the-art middle school. This plan this evening, to say that we have 978 capacity in that facility is foolish. We run a middle school, high school right now of 450 students very nicely. Not overwhelmed, not underwhelmed, a fine program in that facility. 450 kids. To say that we can shoehorn 978 kids in that facility is ludicrous, and it's late to the game. We learn from history. The town of Harwich, you guys tell me, the town of Harwich has been here at least 2 times. This is the 3rd time they've been looking at this. This has been studied. You have incredible partnership support in the town of Chatham and in the MSBA. MSBA's incentive is to keep the cost of this program, the entire program, down, but also meet the programmatic needs and the educational needs of our students. And I don't mean to, I just sometimes get worked up there. When did it become fashionable to not invest in future generations? We're investing in future generations here. Arguably four or five generations of students in both towns. And I think it's an investment that has been studied, is supported. You have a partner in Chatham, a strong partner in Chatham, and a strong partner in the MSBA. You don't have one partner, you have 2. It's a win for Harwich, it's a win for Chatham, and it's a win for the students for generations. And so I would ask for your support, both the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. Appreciate your interest and concern, but I want you to know that this has been studied ad nauseum. And this is, I think you have before you a solution that will solve the ills of the high school that you've been wrestling with for years, for years, almost a decade, since 2003 to 2012. 9 years you've been wrestling with it. And here is a solution with 2 excellent partners, creating a win-win-win for both towns and our students. I ask you for your support. I thank you.
Okay. Angelo, you haven't spoken yet.
Thank
And
you.
Skip.
Excuse me. Thank you. First thing I'd like to do is make a comment about the schools in the Bronx. I started my career in PS 93, which was a lovely building, and it was equipped like you wouldn't believe. Now, when you walked out of the building and walked down the street, it was not so nice. But the school was terrific, and it gave me a terrific education, which I managed to build on. So I think the building may count. The other thing I find disheartening, 2 things. One, I don't know why we have to play with statistics. The increase in projected tax rates may be 23%, but that's not because of the building of the school, except for a small piece of it. The 2.5%, unfortunately, per year are probably going to exist even if we didn't have a school system. So I think that has to be taken out of this conversation, because unfortunately we keep on losing about that much amount of money from the state every year. I don't think we can lose that much more, though. The other thing that I find interesting, and I had nothing to do with it, and I wish I had, is over the last 3 or 4 years, the town has consciously timed debt service and time paying back of borrowing, so that about $1.5 million, and I'm glad Dave is here to confirm this, of payments that we had been making on taxes would have been available, if we didn't spend them on anything else, to pay down some of the debt. In the first year, in the borrowing, I guess of around $2 million payment is correct. It's not $2 million, it's $500,000 in reality. And I think we have to start getting away from using big numbers to scare people and make a point. Yes, that money could have gone back to the taxpayers, but you know what? If it didn't go to the schools, it would have gone to Route 124 or someplace else. Because many of the people like to keep this town operating appropriately. I hate to agree with Mr. Watson for a whole variety of reasons, but I think he's right. The option we have is to make the option that we're discussing correct, clear, and transparent. I would ask that the schools answer all the questions that have been asked. And I know it's difficult, but get the numbers so the Finance Committee and the Selectmen can be comfortable with the numbers. I would ask that you take a look at the contingency situation. And I know that our partners, the state, don't want us to overspend that because then they have to spend money too. So let's set up how we will deal with that so people can be pretty much assured that we're not going to spend it unless it's a real contingency. We're not going to buy something else because I think there's concern there. I think we need to yes, it's 65 million, and whether you look at the 65 million or the 25 million or whatever, the part that we have to deal with is the part that our taxpayers have to pay, and we have to make sure what that is. The only way we reduce that is by reducing the whole number. But I think trying to scare people with the 65 million, because they don't know whether it's part of their tax rate or not, it's not. It just is not. You know, the state is paying a large portion of that. And that's my own. And the other point is, I think it would be very helpful if the schools would also look at the number of students, given our educational capacity or needs, and look at the capacity number. And I know we only have a few weeks, but I think it's worthwhile getting done just to get the discussion off the table. Because otherwise, it's going to continue. And I don't want to see this continued unless there's some real meat there. I mean, I remember when we were carrying $40 million to pay for a school in the capital budget. So, in my view, we just saved $15 million. I know that's not the way to do it. But, Dave, can you just talk to the $1.5 million to $2 million thing?
Good evening, David Ryan, Finance Director. From a financial position, this is probably the ultimate time to enter into this project as historic low interest rates for borrowing from municipalities exist at this time and projected to continue to be low for the next 2 to 4 years. We have planned, as Angelo said, that our debt service schedule, which has been well managed way before I got here, so that was over 8 years ago, that the planning would be such that the new school project, I'm not going to say it was a new building or it was a restoration, but the new building project would fit into our debt service schedule to stabilize the tax rate. And for those who aren't familiar with tax rates, it means that when something retires when there's a capital expenditure to be put on a debt schedule, that something is retired so the interest and the debt service payment have a equal payment, meaning that it's stabilized, that there's no increase or decrease in that matter. We are looking at historical rates. Chatham just borrowed $23 million for 25 years. They received a rate of 2.86, and to boot, they received a bond premium of $1.2 million on a $23 million bond issue. And for those who aren't familiar with municipal finance, a bond premium is the money that the buyer gives back to the issuer. And the state laws require that that $1.3 million has to be used for debt service. In other words, returned to the taxpayers. So, without taking the project or capacities or what's in the building, this is the ultimate time to do the financing for the school project. The interest rates are low. We're looking at hopefully that we'll be able to get below 2.85 interest rate. We hope to do this for 20 years, which will allow us to put on the next project as we go forward with our capital outlay plan. And I recommend from a financial point of view that this is the best opportunity, taking in consideration that we have two good partners, Chatham, who doesn't need a new high school, and the state, who is willing to give us back some of our tax dollars. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Ryan. What is the what would you think would be the potential impacts of the other things that Harwich has coming down the pike, which is sewers and all the water, all our harbors expenses and maintenance that has to be done there? Because I think that Mr. McManus made the statement, if we didn't spend it on anything else, well, we do have other things to spend it on. So
We always have other things
we
to
always
spend
have, but we have two big gorillas coming down.
Right. Actually, I was in a 2-hour meeting this afternoon with the Waterways Management Chair and one of his members, along with our new harbor master, and we were talking about the long-term capital requirements of the harbor. We are looking at funding those either by special revenues, meaning that additional fees on the boat users, or a combination of taxpayer and boat user fees. Sewers are very premature at this time. I attended a meeting with Jim last Thursday night with the Wastewater Advisory Committee. We wouldn't even put pencil to paper, in my opinion, to start calculating the impact of that to this community. There are so many things that we have to go through before we even think of a bond issue. But you're correct. We have those two big projects that will be put forward through the Capital Outlay Committee, and we'll see where those timings come in. Mr. Wigman's correct about the 2.5% being added every year. He's also correct about the first year bond issue being $2 million, but that's not like your home mortgage, which is a fixed amount every month. This one declines every year. So as the debt service payments are relieved from the high school, we can use those to fund other projects. But I wouldn't, at this time, even try to guess what the wastewater management sewers are going to cost all of the communities on the
But it
Cape.
is going to be a big impact.
Well, I think Jim has been talking about that we have 3 other partners that we should be looking at, the federal government, the state, and the county, to partnership in wastewater management. As you know, the town of Harwich will benefit by the wastewater projects done by their neighbors in Orleans and Harwich. However, they're looking at very little sewering, if any at all. Does that mean that they shouldn't share in some of the burden? The federal government, I mean, right now, we have over 1.3 million people on the Cape. Our year-round residents are down to 214. I think the federal government should give us a little of our federal tax dollars back in the form of helping us with wastewater management. And look how much property they own out here, the National Seashore. So they're going to let the towns protect their jewel. So I think we're very early on in thinking of wastewater management. I think we won't be, I'd be surprised if we bond anything within 5 to 10 years, seriously.
Okay.
Excuse me, Linda. I
Whoa.
believe I was next. You had recognized me.
Do you have a question for Rich, because he's, for David, because he's got a specific question to David?
I don't have a question for him.
Use the microphone, please. Thank you.
It's almost like asking you what time it is and you just told us how to build a clock. But give me a round figure or a round estimate of those two big things that are on the plan.
They're not on the plan.
Well, they'll be on the plan.
I have no idea.
No idea. The dredging?
The dredging for Allen Harbor?
No, in total water.
No, I don't have any guesstimate at all.
Okay. Skip?
Yes, I think everybody realizes that the bonding environment at the moment is very favorable, but I have a friend from Bangor who's fond of saying, if you don't need it, it ain't a bargain. And it's, I'm thinking we don't need $65 million worth of new and potentially empty seats, however you want to define a seat. I wanted to correct, and the reason I asked to be recognized originally was to correct something that was stated by a prior speaker regarding a requirement to build a new high school. There is nothing in the intermunicipal agreement that compels us to build anything. And it's clearly spelled out. We have, Jim was good enough to get a legal opinion from town council to that effect. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I've seen that comment made before, that we have to build this building, we're contractually obliged to, and we aren't, not in any way, shape, or form. Thank you.
Ed?
Well,
And then Rich.
I'd agree. There is no legal enforceable contract to build a new high school, but that's the deal. That's the deal we made, the voters made, when they voted overwhelmingly to support regionalization. The hallmark of that effort was to provide Harwich with a new high school facility. That was the deal with our partner in Chatham, that they would get a facility to provide superlative academic and educational opportunities for their children. And quite honestly, that's the premise on which I've been motivated, is to provide the finest educational facilities that we possibly can at the cheapest cost that we possibly can. Having been with this project for a long time, I know the original cost that we were looking at in doing the high school was some $25 million on a renovation job that wasn't really going to improve the educational opportunity provided by the facility. It was just going to fix it up. The next cost we were looking at was some $40 million that might have given us a better facility, but it wasn't going to provide us with a 700 student high school. It was going to be some 400 students, and with all of the limitation on educational opportunity that has, you need a certain amount of students and faculty to instruct the students, to provide the variety of educational choices that the students need these days. That was going to cost us $40 million. We are now at a point where we're going to provide what I find is going to be a wonderful facility, provide educational opportunities that I could have only dreamed of, having grown up in California in the years when they were throwing money at everything, and this facility is going to far outstrip that at a price that's cheaper than any other option that we've looked at over the last 9 years for the Harwich taxpayers. You know, that's the deal that we signed on to, and quite honestly, you know, as a public official, I'd find myself fiduciarily irresponsible if I didn't continue to move on with this plan. And personally, I would find it reprehensible if the first major issue with our new region, I welched on our new partner in Chatham.
Skip?
Yes.
Peter?
I just think it's important to reiterate that there is no legal obligation for the towns to build anything new. If there is a moral obligation in there somewhere, it's in the eye of the imaginer, and I don't think that everybody has that same feeling. I certainly don't. I have seen no documentation to the effect that we are either morally or legally bound to build a building. So I think putting out on the airwaves that we have some kind of a moral obligation to build the building is part of the communication problem that we continue to be experiencing surrounding this entire project.
Peter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff, I want to point out, your numbers are actually a little bit low, because if you compound the 2.5%, you'll end up with 24 or more. So, yeah, so just,
taking a conservative approach.
just to point that out, okay? There's been a lot of discussion tonight. Some of it, I'll say, in my ears, kind of rehashes some of these things about, what do you do and how many students and what the building is and can we use this, can we do that? I'd rather hear, because I haven't heard it yet, a focus on what the plan is for the high school building project, and then talk about value. Because I'll remind this board, I think I'm correct, that we previously took a vote that said if this project came in at $60 million or less, it would be supported by this board. I believe we took that vote at one point in time.
We did.
Since that time, the number's gone up. It's recently come down a bit, and where I'm sitting right now is if this project gets down to $60 million, I'm in support of it. If it's one nickel north of that, I'm not. Because I don't think that the efforts are made to really push these numbers down. This is a model school. It should be the same steel fabrication plan, pretty much, that was done for Ashland or whatever the other models are. We were told that the facade on the front was the only thing that we were going to play with, if you will, for details. There's a lot of contingency in here. We keep hearing that, oh, it's a number not to exceed. Well, the voters aren't going to vote on what not to exceed, because guarantee you will spend everything that's authorized. You got to give them a number if you expect their support that they're going to vote on and get behind. And I think the number is $60 million or less. And I would like to hear some discussion about getting there. And then I would like to hear some discussion, because there's a lot of innuendo back and forth. What are the steps if, in fact, this does fail, either at town meeting or at the ballot box? What is the sequence of events that then happens, so that we can clearly identify that to people, so we take, I'll just call it the scare tactics or fear out of it, because somehow, some way, we will survive. I mean, there will be a plan D, E, F, whatever. I mean, we'll get through this. But I think the taxpayers and the people in general have a right to know, and I think the students have a right to know, what are those steps going forward. So I'd like to hear something about the value, something about what might be done between now and town meeting to get this number down. Just like to hear that.
Is there someone who would like to address those specific questions? I guess the answer is yes.
Thank you. Dan Tavares. I'm the OPM working for the district, work for Skanska. Obviously, there has been a lot of discussion about the project budget, construction costs, and what effort has been made. There has been significant effort made on behalf of the building committee, school administration, the architect, the OPM, to pay attention to everything about this project, site and building. Included in that is also the MSBA, who's also scrutinized the plans, the program, the cost estimates, the budget. So there's been a tremendous amount of effort on everyone's part who's been directly involved with the development of these of this project, to ensure that there isn't anything in there that is considered to be frivolous. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward building. Yes, it's a model school, but it's not the same school that was built 10 years ago. Okay, it's just not. It's not the same school, and the cost of construction continues to rise. There's, data that shows that a project built, very similar model that we just opened up bids about a month ago on a model school in Massachusetts. Bids came in at $295 a square foot. That's the cost of construction. It's really the contractors, it's the economy, the construction market that's going to dictate what the cost of this construction project is going to be. We've budgeted $53 million for the construction numbers. That's based on 2 independent detailed cost estimates. It's not based on taking information that's 10 years old and trying to determine what these costs might be today. It's actually based on real data. So in the $53 million for the construction of the school is in line with the cost of construction with every other model school that's going on right now. And you can see and you can track a model school that was built in 2003, 2009, 2011, 2012. You can see the trend of the same model, very similar size, with the cost of construction increasing. It's just a year ago, less than a year ago, in October of 2011, they opened up bids for East Bridgewater High School, regional high school. It's based on the Whitman-Hanson model. Bids came in at $285 a square foot. Okay, that's the cost of construction in October of 2011. We just opened up bids a month ago for Somerset Berkeley. Same building, very similar size, similar program. It's a model school, $295. We're not making these numbers up. This is real data that is out there. When the estimators are actually putting the information together, it's based on this design, on Monomoy. You know, we don't go around and compare the school. We've been doing that as a necessity to try to understand the differences between the models and between the cost of Ashland, which was built 10 years ago, under different codes, not through MSBA, with a lot of different features in our school, in the Monomoy school, than that was never constructed in Ashland. I mean, it's significant differences. So we can't go through that exercise. What we do is the architect prepares the plans. There's always a process of evaluating the design through, making sure that it's the most efficient design. It's already a very efficient design because MSBA has accepted it as a model school with the ability to adapt the building space itself to meet the educational program and the site requirements. Not every model school is the same. Duxbury is doing the same thing, same model. It's at $307 a square foot right now. We're at $313. And we will, along with the architect and the school building committee and the administration, will continue to be evaluating the design every step of the way. It's not something we can increase. In 2 days, the board of directors at the MSBA will be accepting this project at the number that's been presented. In that is a detailed breakdown of the total project budget that you have. Well, the number that you see there for construction is $53 million. We can't exceed that. The architect has to be, they're obligated, and their engineers are obligated to design within that budget. We're going to continue to try to bring that budget down. We do see some opportunities there, and only because we were at the earliest stage of the project, there were still a lot of things that had yet to be determined with regards to the septic system, with regards to the drainage system, things that we just didn't have a full understanding of at that time, but we still have to put a budget together. We're not going to ignore that. We're going to continue to evaluate the building facade. Yes, there are some premiums associated with building in Harwich, apparently because of the wind issues that have definitely increased the cost of windows, the building facade, the structural systems, the mechanical equipment that gets placed on the roof and the roof system. These are facts. This is not something that's being made up. This is real information that is driving the cost of this project to be slightly higher than the other project, and also the timing of it. A year from now, if you follow the trend, this very same project could probably cost another $5 to $10 a square foot more money. It's just the trend. It's what's going on in today's construction climate in Massachusetts. It's real information. You can go on MSBA's website. You can see for yourself all of the information that's there in terms of the tracking of their projects and what's been going on. In terms of the contingency, we put aside $2.5 million of contingency for construction, and that's strictly to be used to deal with unforeseen conditions and issues that come up during construction. MSBA doesn't allow us to just take that money and spend it somewhere else within the budget. That's why there's a very detailed project budget sheet, and every dollar is accounted for line by line. We can't just say, well, we're going to add this, or we're going to do this, and we're going to take $1 million out of here, or $500,000 and move it. It just doesn't happen that way. Not anymore. Maybe that was the case 10 years ago. It's not the case now with the MSBA. So it's there. That's the whole reason why everything had to be spelled out specifically, so that way it's clearly understood where this money is going, how this money is going to be spent. If money was to be used other than what it was intended to be, especially for contingency, it would be require the approval of the MSBA. When comparing Monomoy against every other model school going on in the Commonwealth, we are basically at the average point of construction contingency and owner's contingency. Having, even though it's a model school, having 4.5% associated with a school project, it's still a school project, still a lot of unknowns when it comes to the site. Yes, it's a model school, but it's a model school that has been adapted. It's a model school that has been refined, and there's still coordination issues, and there's still design issues. Otherwise, we'd be out to bid right now. Obviously, we have another 6 months to go before we can actually complete the design and have it ready to go out to bid. So, I'm hoping that I'm addressing some of those concerns. The budget is a budget. We will continue to look at every opportunity, but $3.5 million. I'm sorry, $3 million of contingency, $500,000 for owner and $2.5 million for construction is right in line with every other school project going on right now related to model schools, and it's very appropriate. I mean, if it's there, it won't get spent if it's not necessary, and that's just how it's going to be with the contingencies.
Peter, do you feel like your question was answered?
Well, I heard him go through the rack up, but I mean, if you're really looking at this whole project cost, and you look at things to try and get a number that's below $60 million, there's an alternative in here called an athletic field. Many people are questioning, we have a Jimmy McPhee field now. We have a track that was resurfaced back in the Sid Ziegler days. I don't remember, there was a fundraiser that did some of that work. And people are saying, I know the bleachers got cut out, whatever, but there's still $1.6 million in here for that, which makes, in my mind, a significant impact and could be a sell it or don't sell it kind of thing. And some people would say, well, why isn't that a separate article since it's listed as an alternative? And by the way, to my understanding, the state doesn't reimburse any of that cost. It's just totally on the two towns, if I understand it correctly. Maybe I don't, but because they're listed as alternatives. Maybe you could clarify that for us.
Oh, that's correct. The alternates that are listed there that relate to the track, basically the athletic complex is not reimbursed by the MSBA. Okay. So dollar for dollar, it's going to come out of the taxpayers for Chatham and for Harwich. But it's also an alternate, meaning that when we actually go out to bid with this project, those alternates will be identified as separate bids. So even at that time, there's always the option to elect not to do them if they're exceeding the budget, or just because there's an alternative solution to providing, a different means to construct those fields. It's there. It's in the overall project budget. That when we do go out to bid, there'll be the base bid, and then there'll be these alternates that'll come in with separate cost. And basically, there's a decision that's made at that time whether or not to include those alternates in the contract with the general contractor.
Excuse me, but that's not what we're asking the voters to vote on. We're saying to the voters in this vote, they're going to go to a ballot, they're going to commit to a dollar number, even though it's listed as an alternate, they're going to expect that gets done, or not.
Right.
Okay, and so if it was taken out or put in a separate article, then people would say, okay, that's what I'm voting on. I can either elect to do it or not, in addition to the basic school building project. If the taxpayers were to fund this as it's written today, and we didn't build this athletic field, I think they'd be very disappointed and feel like they were deceived, quite frankly.
Well, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that that's what's going to happen when we receive the bids. There'll be separate costs associated with each of those alternates.
Yeah, but you see, the problem is you say things like, we get the bid, the number goes like this, it might be like this, we could elect to do this, we could elect not to do it. There's so much uncertainty in those statements. People want some preciseness, and I know you've got to finish the design. I know it's got to go out to bid, but it's almost as if we should be voting for one thing, and that's to go the next 6 months with the project, and then put it out to bid and come back with hard numbers, which, by the way, is the way we usually do building projects in this town that I know of. So.
And that would be ideal, but that's not the way it's done with an MSBA project. We have to agree on a budget at schematic design level before you go to the next step.
I understand completely, and that's part of the dilemma the taxpayer faces. Right, and that's part of the risk we all face going forward.
Yep, in regards to the alternates, I'm not following your question on that. I wasn't suggesting that there's anything in flux here. This is a budget for that work. It's included in the project budget. It's part of the project.
Yeah, you made a statement, I believe, that said once we get the bids, we could elect to do it or not do it, that's all.
And that's a fact. When the bids come in, you'll have the option at that point to elect to not to take those alternates if those alternates come in over budget. That's a fact.
May I ask a question? You just said you will have the option to do or not to do. Who is the you making the decision?
I'd say it's probably the school building committee or the regional school committee, you know.
So it's not us.
Well,
Just
no,
checking.
Well, you know, it's, you know, these items were reduced down based on feedback that I think the community has.
I understand, but
received.
I'm just trying to get, I was just trying to get an answer to the
Yes.
question of who is you,
Yep.
and you is not us. You is the building committee, so it's that group.
When I refer to you, I mean the district.
I understand,
the
but
two
I'm just trying to
communities.
understand who you is.
So it would be the building committee.
Okay.
Question, how many square feet are we building?
168,000 square feet.
If you want to speak, you're going to have to go up to the microphone, please. But Ed is next.
Just a comment. You know, it is, the you is, that is building this project is the regional school district. You know, when we build a house, you don't let your neighbors decide
Mhm.
what type of lights you're going to put on the outside.
Oh, I'm
Those
okay.
are your decision, the owner's decision.
I understand that, Ed, but I just wanted to make sure that it was clear also to the listening audience as to who you was that was making decisions on alternates to build, not to build, that it wasn't going to come back to a town meeting, it wasn't going to come back to the Board of Selectmen in either town, that it was not, we were not the decision makers in that point, it was the building committee and the regional school district. All right, so Peter and then
Yeah,
Rich.
only because you asked me if I got my question answered. My final question that I asked that didn't get an answer is what happens if this fails?
Yes, and I haven't heard an answer to that question either.
I have something different. I'm not going to answer that one. Thank you. I wanted to clarify what I meant earlier when I was talking about the costs associated with accreditation. There's certainly plenty of history in other schools that have either been placed on probation or lost their accreditation in terms of what the impact of that is under the school choice regulations since the '93 ed reform. And what happens when a school faces that kind of thing is that some of the parents and families decide to pull their kids out of the school and send them someplace else. And that pulls money out. I'm not telling this body anything that they don't know, and that it wasn't too many years ago when we were losing $1 million every year. Net, lost, out. And we have done a tremendous job, and by we I mean the whole town, in overcoming that legacy. And something like losing your accreditation is something that puts your budget at risk, as well as the educational situation at risk. Because when a sufficient number of families choose to take advantage of that option, you lose money in your operational budget. I don't know that there's any easy way of comparing what's the long-term cost of going ahead with the project with what the long-term cost is of not going ahead with the project. Because there are so many variables that go into it. I don't envy the Finance Committee or the Board of Selectmen or the Regional School Committee in trying to do that kind of analysis. I can say, being someone who's rather overly engaged in the process, I think the long-term prospects financially of not going ahead with this project are worse than the concerns that are very appropriately being addressed tonight. So I think that's part of, what's that expression? You know, everything is relative. It's not just what it might be nice back to before 1993, but it's no longer just what do we think is sufficient in the town of Harwich. Because of what we think is sufficient is not what the parents in the community feel is sufficient. They leave and there's a big sucking sound. And just to use a quick example, since the fields have been mentioned as a topic, one of the reasons why both Chatham and Harwich lose students on school choice is athletic opportunities. Having that and this has been all vetted through the building committee and through the school committee. One of the reasons for that facility is to address that very issue. When you have that artificial surface, you can have more teams using the field on an ongoing basis at many different hours of the day. That allows the regional school district to offer more opportunities that keeps kids here in this town. And that's the competitive environment, whether we like it or not, in which we're operating. And the same thing applies to elective classes, AP classes, and all those other kinds of things that I won't repeat myself on because I brought them up earlier. I did want to ask through you, Madam Chair, if that's appropriate, what our current bond rating is.
Double A plus.
Double A plus. And is there anything in the capital plan, even the big projects mentioned earlier, that vaguely has us on any path towards bankruptcy? You know, through you, Madam Chair, to any of the management or...
Thank you, David.
I try to stay out of this by sitting way over there, but I do get some exercise. Actually, our indebtedness from taxation, the debt service is $2.7 million. Standard & Poor's during our last bond rating commended us for the small amount of debt we are carrying on our balance sheet. So the answer to the question is we would get a big warning before we were even approaching anything like what's happening in California or Pennsylvania. Our AA plus rating is probably it's the same as our national government. Our partner in this venture is AAA. So if we were to go towards bankruptcy, I think we'd be hitting a single A minus. Would be a shot across the bow, and I doubt we're going to be going in that area. We will be refinancing some of our existing debt, and we will have a bond rating conference call coming up in September, so I'll be able to give you more information after that date.
I'd like to have someone from the school committee or the building committee, or whomever, probably the school committee, address the topic that Mr. Hughes raised, which was, what are the events if one of these votes fail? What happens and where does it go? Because there's 4 shots here, 2 town meetings, 2 ballots. If any one of those fail, the whole thing fails. So what is the event that's going to happen? And please, can we stay away from the doom and gloom of we lose accreditation, et cetera. But the events that happen and what are we going to do about it? Because that really is what is the backstop method or concept of if this goes down, what are we going to do other than run in circles and scream and shout? Ma'am.
Hi, Linda.
Hi,
my
how
name
you
is
doing?
Sharon Stout. I'm on the school committee, and I cannot give you a full answer for that. I can give you a little bit of that. Whereas Harwich voted for regionalization at close to 100%, Chatham voted for it just barely over 50%. We are having a lot of work, not just on the schools and the school building committee, but we're having a lot of work on trying to do a delicate balance in trying to have Chatham and Harwich come together. As some of you may know, it's been a over 40-year process to get this regionalization to happen. So it's very, very important that this delicate balance happen very successfully. There would be a major impact from Chatham on that. As we heard from Pam Groswell, we have locked in a 10-year commitment. I think we'd have a lot of negative backlash from that, and it might not exceed the 10-year commitment.
Madam Chair. Dan? Or is...
And I'm looking for...
Yeah, one of the two, I think they would be, procedurally, you're looking at the steps, yes.
Well, it's not so much the steps,
Well,
but it is if this fails at any one of those 4 votes, what are we going to do?
Procedurally, Dan is looking up the exact process, but immediately we would be in jeopardy of losing the MSBA's commitment to the project. They are, in fact, already a little bit concerned with what they've been hearing. In a second sense, we anticipate going out to bid in the fall, and that particular deadline in the process is what allows us to be comfortable with the fact that in September of 2014 we would be moving into the building. If we delay that, then we're likely to be delayed by a year, which has budgetary implications, particularly for Harwich. We would be, obviously with NEASC, we would, not to reiterate the doom and gloom, but we would lose Harwich High School into the probationary category and would be pressured by NEASC to address the issue in some other way. But Dan, do you have the
So
the
what would,
procedural?
I understand there's a process, Dan, and thank you, but it's, so what do we do if this goes down? What do we do?
Well, you may not have been too far off with the running in circles part.
The chicken dance.
We're in serious trouble. We've invested years in building a plan that was in the best interest of the students and both communities, and this is in essence where regionalization happens, is in that building when it opens in 2014. Most of the other factors that we've talked about in terms of regionalization kick in at that point. So immediately, I suppose if it goes down, there would be a lot of meetings trying to figure out how we bail ourselves out of that and how we do it in a way that doesn't cost more. This is the most responsible, economical approach that we've been able to come up with. So anything else is far more complicated and quite frankly, not something that I've experienced. I know that Dan has seen those kinds of things happen, so that's why I think you're next.
And not so much the process part of it, because I'm sure that, yes, there would be a hoopla that would ensue, but it's really, what do we do?
Right.
And it doesn't sound like, you know, we're trying to avoid answering that question, because we really don't know what we do, I think is kind of what I'm hearing here.
Well, yeah, the MSBA has a failed vote policy for every district in the Commonwealth. Obviously, they're holding funds available for this particular project. If a project can't be committed financially locally, then the likelihood of that money going elsewhere is probable, more than probable. Here's what they say. In the event that a school district fails to approve the funding for a proposed project within the 120-day deadline. Now, the 120-day deadline starts on the 25th. That's when
Of August.
Of August. That's when, I'm sorry, July.
July.
July 25th. In 2 days, that's when the clock starts ticking. So the district has 120 days to achieve successful votes in both communities, all votes, including the ballot vote. Essentially, if it does fail in either town or in both towns, the school district must submit to the MSBA a plan that, one, that presents the vote results, two, explains the school district's understanding of the reasons for the failed vote, and three, sets forth the school district's plan to remedy the failed vote and suggest a timeline for such a remedy. The MSBA will review the plan to determine whether or not it can continue to set aside MSBA funds for the proposed project. However, a failed vote likely will result in the school district being required to submit a new statement of interest to the MSBA and await a second invitation from the MSBA to enter into the feasibility study phase of the MSBA process. And that's where we're just completing that process now. We're seeking to get their approval to move forward with the project. We're doing that in 2 days, and then likewise with the two communities at the end of August and early September for the votes. So that's their plan. That's the plan we all have to follow, and you know, hopefully we won't have to get there, but that's the situation.
Skip and then Mr. Gunderson.
It sounds to me like then what we would do would be to repeat the process we are now at the tail end of for round one.
I believe that is, yes.
So it's still, what we would do is we would try again to build the building
That's what I'm hearing.
with no other alternative.
They could be, depending on the plan, there could be an effort made to go back to the voters to try to get the project passed.
But again, the thrust here is to build a building. And there are no other choices. That's what I'm hearing.
There's a problem that exists. That's what started the whole process many years ago. That problem will continue to exist, so you could choose to do nothing and, you know, still deal with whatever the fallout is for that, or continue to try to pursue with the MSBA as a collaborative partner in trying to find a suitable solution for both districts.
I would like to hear an opinion from somebody who is more intimate with either or both towns than from someone from a company that is offering to be the owner's project manager on this project, and someone who has a personal financial interest in it, such as a taxpayer.
Mr. Gunderson. Excuse me, Mr. Dykens. Mr. Gunderson is...
I was seated before Mr. Gunderson. I just had to sit down.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah. No, I'll attempt to respond. Terry Russell, former member of the High School Harwich Building Needs Committee, presently member of the Monomoy Regional Committee. 40 years in town, former teacher, former principal. Plan B, what's going to happen? We're here to try to make it happen. So we didn't have a subcommittee to attempt to go to Plan D and what are the other options just in case. 2.5 hours ago, a citizen gave a 4- or 5-page proposal. As a former principal and teacher, I'd give it an incomplete. And yet for the last 2 hours, we've been able to judge what 2 and 3 and 7 years of study have done. I urge this. I don't know how we come up with $60 million, not another dollar. I don't know how we come up with $46 million and not another dollar or I leave. I urge the committee, vote your conscience, allow the citizens, and allow this forum next week, which may not answer all of our questions because I don't have all the answers, but I think the committees that have been appointed by the Selectmen 4 or 5 years ago have done due diligence. And they've trusted each other, they've submitted reports. They were timely. And now we have a difference as to how we go to another option. I recommend, and I urge, that we attempt in good conscience to support this process, allow it to go to the town meeting. We all stand up before a town meeting to urge them what's the best for our kids. One of our speakers said that brick and mortar, that doesn't enhance excellent teaching. 50-year-old schools do not enhance excellent teachers to their potential. 50-year-old schools do not enhance the potential for excellent students. I don't know if we continue this evening by an attempt to convince each other as to what's the best route to take. All I can do is I attended the meetings. I have been a taxpayer. I find this good judgment to move forward on this project, if not with the total support of selectmen or with finance committee members because there's a better option, so be it. But we'll all in good conscience on August 28th stand before our fellow citizens and say, this is the best plan that we're able to come up with. Our financial fiduciary guardians tell us that it won't bankrupt us. Our debt service seems to match in for the next years to address this issue of what we do to cause this system, a region, to have that source of excellence and quality that I think will enhance our community, just like our good harbors and our golf courses and our Brooks libraries, all are enhanced, are all improved to try to enhance our community. So I doubt that it answered any of your detailed questions, but I know where I stand on the project. I thank you, and I urge you to give it due consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson and then Mr. Lamantia.
Okay, I'll try and I'll try and make it brief. First of all, I didn't realize that we had made a backroom deal, Mr. McManus, on when I was voting last fall. That's what I was voting for, a new high school. I thought I was voting to regionalize 2 school districts. I must be very naive. I really admit I am. I thought that was still an open issue. I knew it was a big issue. I knew they wanted to do something like that, but I didn't know that's what I was voting. It's too bad you didn't make that crystal clear in some of your other meetings. The other issue about how to make this a more palatable deal, the cost. Without looking at specific inflation numbers or anything else, you can go to the MSB website. You can look at other schools of similar size, recent construction, and you see that they're appreciably smaller. We went over this the last time we had this discussion. They're appreciably smaller in square foot per pupil. I'm not talking about prior to MSBA space standards. I'm talking about current situations. Then there's also charts on that MSBA site that actually gives guidance on what the gross square foot should be for schools with certain enrollments. We're kind of a mixed bag because we're looking at an 8th grade, which would be more of a junior high school. So junior high school, it's still a lot smaller than what I see the square foot of the Monomoy plan. I don't know why that can't be examined further. I don't know why when somebody asks for re-examination and lowering the costs, for whatever reason, whether it's 60 or 55 or 10, that they basically said, well, we'll cut out the hot dog stand. That's all you got. I think there's other areas to look at. I personally do feel that paying $1.7 million for an artificial turf, why should the taxpayers be asked to pay full freight on a $1.7 million athletic facility when these extras only benefit a small percentage of the 700 students? At the same time, not everybody plays sports. Sorry. Also, keep in mind that Harwich was basically pulled off a vote or pulled a water treatment facility off the ballot, which that $1.7 million could have gone to that. We did that serves all the residents of Harwich. We weren't given that. That's the priorities that I'm hearing being said here. The athletic field is more important than water treatment facilities, because you were afraid that it wouldn't go through if we had too many capital projects looking for overrides. Just comment. Let's see. One last thing, just as a real aside. If you look again through the MSBA website, you'll find that there may be a recapture of funds on the Harwich Middle School. I don't know if your committee has looked at that, but if, as quoting here the section, if the authority determines that said facility will be sold, leased, or removed from the service of an assisted facility or an assisted facility that has received a payment from the authority or the Commonwealth but has not met the 50-year service requirement, the authority may recapture a portion of the financial assistance that said assisted facility has received. Essentially, you may end up splitting the difference in the sale of that property. You may have to split it 50-50. So one last question, which I don't quite understand. We've always talked of a 6-building to a 4-building. And yet I've never heard anything. I've heard a lot about the middle school in Harwich, but I haven't heard anything about the complex in Chatham. Are they giving up a building? Are they selling a building? How do we go 6 to 4 if we're going to continue to use the complex in Chatham for middle school? Thank you.
Okay. Jim, is it not correct that we got a ruling from the state that we would not be having to give any money back on the middle school if we sold it, et cetera?
That's correct. The Middle School Reuse Committee posed that question early on. We do have a firm answer from MSBA that they would not seek any kind of reimbursement if we sold that, declared a surplus and sold it.
Okay. Hopefully that answers that question directly.
Are you going to speak to the 6th building? Yeah.
Mr. Dykens.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and I just want to speak to the buildings. The plan all along was to have both elementary schools stay distinct in each town so that the younger children would have their own kind of home elementary school. And the plan was to use the complex in Chatham, middle school, high school complex, as the middle school for both towns. And the plan all along, and the intent in the regional agreement, is to build a new high school in Harwich. That has been the plan all along. So you don't have 6 schools as we do today. We have 4 schools. Should we build the high school in Harwich and run the region with 4 schools, not 6 schools?
And the
hang on.
the Chatham Middle School, High School is operated as 2 distinct schools. Two complete separate administrative operations. You're eliminating one of those.
They're right together, yes, yeah. And I just also want to clear the air if I could as well. We have been incredibly transparent about the intent of this partnership and what we'd like to do and the program we'd like to run and how many schools we'd like to run. And no one in this room, frankly, should be surprised that we're going from 6 schools to 4 and that the intent all along was to build a new high school in Harwich. We have been very upfront for 3 or 4 years now that this has been our plan. Should be no surprise to anybody in this room or in the town of Harwich. No surprise. One other point. I really appreciate Mr. LaMancha's comment about focusing on the net costs. Yes, $64 million is a lot of money, and it's I call it a gross cost. And they will pound on that. Office of OPM, our architects, and when we go out to bid, they will pound on that number. They will. But we need to focus in both towns on what the net cost is to each town. And Harwich is looking at least today, with today's numbers, a $25 million project. And Chatham's looking at a $9.9 million project. That's the net cost to both towns, not $64 million. Yes, that's the gross cost, and that will drive that net cost. But the net cost today is 25 and 9.9, not 65 or 64.7, because we have another partner, and that is the state. And they're paying the lion's share of the nut. And they are incentivized to keep that number down as well because they don't want to pay any more than they have to pay. So the incentives are aligned between the towns, and between the taxpayers, and between the state. I thank you.
Okay. Angelo is next.
Just 2 comments. Dave, I think you in your 5-year planning have a cost saving from going from the 6 to the 4. If you just explain what that is. While he's walking up there, the reason I'm asking that is everybody's been tiptoeing around what happens if these votes fails. So let me untiptoe for a second. The first thing that's going to happen, Dave, what's the number? How much does it cost us?
For which project are we talking?
For if we don't arrive at opening the school, moving from 6 to 4.
The consultant put together a pro forma for the first year of operations. It was put together with the help of the existing staff at both schools, both the superintendents, principals, business manager, finance directors. We put together a plan that would take from operating 6 schools down to 4 schools, and the attrition that would happen through the savings of staffing levels. We projected a $2.9 million savings in the first year of operations. That figure represents about $2 million savings to the town of Harwich.
Okay. So the first thing that happens is it costs Harwich money, around $2 million. The second thing that happens is, guess what? The high school still doesn't qualify. It's still a problem. We still have to do something with the high school. So then we leave everything up to Chatham. And if I were Chatham, I would know what I would do. I would just say, see ya. And they have a history of doing that. So I would sorry. So what I would suggest happens is we now go back to where we were about 10 years ago, trying to figure out what we can do. And by the way, we won't have the Chatham
school to play around with in the composition. So we can either go back to the $25 million to redo the school, and by the way, the state has said they won't contribute anything to that, or we could try and build a new school, and going back to those numbers, that's $40 million. And they won't pay any of that, which they've said. So that's our choices. And then what we will do is run around looking for things we can do. But I don't know what else it's going to be. Now, I would much rather see if we can get these prices down a bit in any way we can and have everybody covered with the information. One of the things we can do is move the school to New Hampshire. Now, you're laughing, but it's not very funny. When we built the police station, we discovered that it cost us about $2 million more in prevailing wages to build it in Massachusetts. But we don't have any control over that. And I'm just being facetious, but I think it's a difficult problem. The reason you're not getting answers is I don't think there's anything at fingertips says, okay, if that fails, we do this. We know what the other answers are. That's the only thing that exists. Or I guess we could try and regionalize with Dennis and Yarmouth. Yeah, I'm serious. Yeah. I'm not trying to be funny. And that's about it.
He's been waiting patiently.
I just wanted to say, and maybe Skip's going to say this already, there's a contract with the town of Chatham that you have to stay as a region for 10 years. So it's a scare tactic to say that Chatham will pull out of it. If they pulled out of it, we'll sue them and get our money that way. So maybe it would be to our advantage if they do pull out of it.
Excuse me. They could do it, but not do anything. Just don't do anything. Just stay the way you are and don't do anything. And you know what? Then it costs us $2 million a year forever.
Well, if you want to guarantee the $2.9 million in savings, that if it doesn't happen, if we go with the school and it doesn't happen, you'll pay it, I'll vote for the school. But I don't think, nobody's responsible for the $2 million. We don't even have a budget for 2015, or 14 rather, from the schools. Nobody, the savings is illusory, if you don't mind me saying. But I'd like to come back to a couple of things that Mr. Hughes talked about. First of all, you can't change the number. As I understand it, the warrant's been set. The number that's going to voters is $64.7 million or whatever it is. So that's a number. I don't see how you can vote in favor if your position is $5 more than $60 million. The number is $64 million. So that's a set number, so it doesn't matter what happens at this point. The second thing is that, let me come with the athletic fields for a second. Tom Birch sent a letter to the regional school committee, and actually he sent a copy of it, I believe, to the selectmen here, suggesting a way that you could take the students out of the high school, tear down the high school, build the high school, the new high school where the old high school is, and you'd save the fields. And he got absolutely no response to it. So there's a way of saving money right there. Plus, I hate to bring this sore subject up, but there are a couple of fields over behind the community center. Oh, wait a minute, they can't be used. There's no handicap access. Well, there's a waste of money that we spent, but maybe we could do something and use those fields and incorporate it into the high school. Maybe the kids can actually walk across the street and use those fields. The second thing is there's been a lot of comment about we need to have a great athletic program. Well, I don't want to draw any comparison because it's really not fair. But when a school emphasizes athletics over school and the students and the well-being of the students, you got a Penn State situation. Never that bad, and I told you I don't want to do that. Well,
all right. Let's be courteous
you know what? I let
to one
other people
another.
have their opinions and state their opinions and present it. But I'm just saying that we ought to be emphasizing the academics as opposed to the athletics. We also said, this gentleman said, he'd give me an incomplete for this Plan B. Well, I'd give the school committee an incomplete because they have no friggin' idea what they're going to do
if this fails. I at least came up with, or the Taxpayers Association at least has come up with a Plan B, a possibility. Maybe it's not ideal, but it gives a possibility of what you can do, and that's what I said. I prefaced it by saying if this fails, which it could fail, it's got 4 votes, as the chairperson points out. It could fail, and it's a fallback. It is a position, a Plan B. Nobody else seems to have a Plan B. So I make that point. That's it. Thank you.
Can I just address something?
I think that Mr. Dykens is hopped up, and he has a...
No, I think I'm next.
I appreciate the
I'm going to let
notion.
Mr. Dykens speak.
Thank you so much.
This is a
I just
joint-
appreciate the notion that folks are looking for an answer about what happened if these didn't pass, these votes went down. We have a 10-year deal. We have a partnership agreement. Chatham would continue to be, I would imagine, a regional partner and continue to save the money that it's saving today. Harwich, however, and Harwich would be paying more money because we would not be achieving the synergies and the economic savings that would accrue to the region and have been planned to accrue to the region when we go from 6 schools to 4. For example, and I hate to pick on Latin all the time, but take the subject of Latin. We have 2 Latin teachers. Well, you combine a high school, do you really need 2 Latin teachers? You probably don't. And there are other areas of combined savings that when you combine 2 businesses, when you consolidate, you will have synergies and you will have savings as we bring the physical plants together. But should we not bring the physical plant together and have a joint high school, we won't be able to achieve those savings. Just won't. We'll be running 2 disparate programs, one in Chatham, one in Harwich, Aged. And then you've got a real issue with that high school in Harwich. As I said earlier this evening, you've had an issue there for 9-10 years. You've been struggling with it. And here you have a viable, reasonably thought out solution with folks that have done years of due diligence with 2 wonderful partners. What don't you like? Thank you.
Linda, Jeff, just a question, because I'm afraid I heard something incorrectly. You said that that one. I'm sorry. You said that someone sent a letter about the ball field, and the suggestion was, if I heard it right, was that you moved the kids out of the school, knocked it down, built another school right in the same spot, and you could save the fields.
That's correct.
What do you do with the 400 kids that you take out of the school? How do you educate them?
Well, you could put them, again, you can put them over in Chatham, may shoehorn them in for a year, if that's in fact the situation.
Oh, no, you're making, okay, so you're making an assumption that Chatham will buy that. Okay.
Well, it's a, wait a minute, Chatham will buy that. Wait a second, it's not that. We're a regional school system now, and we're talking about a way of potentially saving money. And if we can build the high school on the same location where it is right now, and save the ball fields and save money, why wouldn't you look at that?
Well, I think you would look at it if it made sense, but I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense.
Well, nobody's looked at it, so I don't know.
All right.
I mean, that's the problem, and I think we're finding out that a lot of alternatives haven't been looked at. Maybe the best alternative is to build a new school. I don't know. That's up to the taxpayers. Okay, I offered a Plan B in case it gets turned down.
Okay.
Tom Birch offered a suggestion on what you might do to save some money by tearing the old school down, and it's a lot easier. I'm sure it's a heck of a lot easier to go in, clear the site, and build a new school rather than try to build a new school while an existing school is there. There's a lot of disruption that goes on. So my point is, again, somebody else made a valid suggestion that should have been looked at, which I'm not sure it has been. And I think as we're finding out tonight, there really haven't been a lot of alternatives that have been considered. And what do we do? I'm just concerned that it might get turned down.
Other comments from the Finance Committee? Questions, comments? Dana.
Thank you. I've been listening tonight, hearing everybody talk. I don't know how the Finance Committee is going to end up voting on this, even amongst ourselves. But our goal has been to just gather everything we can for information, and that's pretty much what we're doing. We have a commitment to vote on this August 2nd at this point after the August 1st meeting and decide then where we stand as a committee, whether we support it or not. I think that I think there is a strong possibility that this could be voted down, and I think we have to think about that because it's part of the discussion now. I think there's a lot of good points that have been made about supporting it, but I also, just with my ear to the ground and what I hear in my daily life, have heard a lot of people come to me and say that they're not going to support this. And I think as a member of the Finance Committee that I have to be ready for those things. I have taken the time to look up some of the schools that are on probation or on the watch list now, that went from the watch list to the warning list. There's 8 schools. 7 of those schools are for curriculum, and 1 is for not having enough support from their community. And that's probably the category we would fall into. And this is a New England look at it, so there were 4 schools also from Maine on the list, and one of them was my old high school, so it meant something to me personally. And I did go to the websites and look up those schools, and one of the school that is on the warning list right now are national cheerleader champs. They're going on with their education. The loan people are saying that they're in communication with them about putting together a new plan. That's what's going on in their district. And I think that that's part of the discussion. We have to be ready to be able to answer question what is going to happen next if this thing fails and where it goes. And we have to also be able to tell why we support it or why we don't support it. I've been hearing, I'm glad tonight that a lot of the comments that I've heard in the past have been corrected or fixed or stressed correctly tonight. I think anybody that views this is going to get a better view of some of the comments. There's been a lot of comments in the media that were off by $5 million here or $4 million there that I think have been corrected tonight so that we don't have a lot of misrepresentation out there. I think that we didn't have a price 3 or 4 years ago of what this school would be when we first started talking about the region and whether or not we're committed to a new high school and how we all voted and so forth. Now the money's there, $64.7 million. And that's what people are deciding on. And as Mr. Ryan pointed out, it's not going to bankrupt the town. The town is a rich town. There's no question about that compared to a lot of other towns. For assets, we're turning over a tremendous amount of assets to our Monomoy School District as a town, just as Chatham is. We're giving this district the best possible chance it can to succeed. So there's no question about what we're giving as a town. The question is whether the people who live here as residents can afford this. That's where the affordability comes in, not having to do with the town having to be able to afford this. It's can the residents afford this? And that's my biggest concern at this point. And what I'm hearing from them is that they can't. So as a member of this committee, I have to be ready for that possibility. Whether they vote that way or not, I don't know. There's a lot of good reasons for them to support this school. But there's also a lot of concern and fear in their voices out there. And as a member of this committee, it's going to be our job to pick up the pieces if it doesn't pass. And it's also going to be our job to move forward correctly if it does pass. There's a lot of little discussions that have been going back and forth with the debate that we won't turn anybody's heads on, so I'm not going to get into my feelings on whether or not we should have AstroTurf or not. But I think that the big picture we have to be ready to deal with in either way. and that's where I am. On the 2nd, I'll be in a position to make my vote, but that's what I'm hearing right now.
How about I see we have a couple more comments and then probably wind this up. Sir?
My name is Ed Weil, 8-year residence here, volunteer coach at the high school. I'm free. I don't cost you anything. You'll love me, right? The number here is $25 million, not 65. And, you know, Jeff and his group have done a great job here in terms of bringing attention to bringing the project down as much as we could. When I went to the various building committees and school committees and what have you, everybody was talking about the same thing. This whole town has a real concern about spending the money, and it's in every committee. Yours, the two here, and the rest of them. And I applaud that. I think that's great. What I see with the kids right now, we're able to, with the Monomoy School District, field full teams, both varsity and JV. So kids that couldn't play can play. You know, from an athletic standpoint, that's pretty good. The school is really built on a triangle. And a triangle is education, art, and athletics. And it has to have that today in the 21st century to compete. I heard a lot of stuff about Ashland, and I spent 17 years in architecture with the McGraw-Hill Construction Group architectural record, and they transfer me all over the country, get rid of my Brooklyn accent. And what I see here is, you know, we really have something really special. I mean, we have a number of people who have really worked hard to put together a really good content for the 21st century so our kids can compete. Not only can they, there's a lot of kids in this town that are never going to go to college, and this is going to give them an opportunity with the new STEM programs. And we have to worry about that and about those kids. And I see, you know, the teachers at Harwich that I've been working with for the last 7 years, there's not one of them that don't care. And I'm so proud to be part of it. And you should be of them. I think we have a great opportunity here to build a great standard school for the 21st century. I think the kids will have a chance to play as many sports as they can. And they said, what about a turf field? Well, turf field allows heavier play, more teams to play on it, and you don't have to build as many fields. And we only have 3 fields for that high school, the turf and 2 others. So, you know, you kind of need it because you don't have enough. And we found in the other schools I've taught in, it's really interesting. The parents whose kids are playing sports tend to have a real interest in the school. And they sort of do come to meetings about curriculum and things like that. I mean, the school I coached down in Florida, 50% of the football players' parents showed up at a meeting. When it comes to a curriculum for the whole school, it's 5%. So those kinds of things shows why athletics is so important in the school. I think you have a very unique opportunity here. You're gonna get $29 million back from those idiots up in Boston that took it away from us and never give it back. I'd like to see the Taxpayers Association try and get more than 8% of our money coming back coming across the bridge, and spend a lot of time on that. But we've got a chance to build infrastructure here and build a great town. And look at what they did. They put a 580-some auditorium so we can have culture in this town, real culture. Something where we can bring in groups where everybody can enjoy it. And they gave up, what, one basketball court to get it. So there's been a lot of thought. Jeff mentioned to get rid of the stands and the concession stands and all of that stuff. As soon as you brought it up, Next week, it was wiped out, because it's something you can bring up later and do. But you can't wipe out a field. You have to have it for both PE and for the sports. And this school has to be competitive. You take one thing out of this thing, it's like dominoes. It'll fall apart. You won't get your 700 kids. They'll go somewhere else. And that's the way it is. Thank you.
Last comment, ma'am?
Shorter. My name's Leslie Schneeberger. I'm a resident of Harwich, mother of children in the Harwich school system, member of the school building committee, and architect in town. You can believe whatever you want or decide whatever you want, but I think it's pretty clear there's been a lot of time and effort for quite a few years getting us to this point. You ask what would happen if we start over again. No one can answer it completely because we really don't know. But the way to start this process was administrators getting together, going to the state, going through steps and steps and steps for a good 7 years to get to this point. I guess if it completely failed, we'd go back to that point again of who do we turn to for advice? Who do we go to start reconfiguring the whole school? If you really think that you can get a building or reconfigure our buildings for $25 million, all the fees for the creative expertise that go into it, everything else, by starting over, I think that's very short-sighted. I think to abort all that everyone's done at this point because of a knee-jerk reaction and saying it hasn't been thought out is incredibly short-sighted. This building has been carefully considered. It holds all the programs that Chatham and Harwich currently offer. It's been designed so that all the same wonderful extracurricular and academic programs we have at our individual schools will be in this new building. It's not just sports, it's everything. We have great teachers, we have great student-teacher ratio. This is the culmination of what the towns have determined is the best way to make that happen. And to start completely over is going to cost a whole lot more.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I think we've heard a lot of good information. There's been a lot of give and take, and thank you very much all for listening and for all your comments. You're certainly welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting.
Everybody has to.
Good luck.
No.
Good luck.
Okay. Got 2 words for you.
Are we done?
See ya, right? Adios.
Are we done?
Yeah, let's see how quickly we can follow them out the door.
Did you tell Ann that we're coming so she can do what she has to do? It pains me to agree with you.
Okay, if we could go to the, there's no new business, but the town administrator's report. Jim, you want to make it quick? It's late.
This is for the week ending July 20th. As you know, we had a ballot question posed with regard to Pilgrim Nuclear Plant, and it passed overwhelmingly at ballot, and we've now received a letter from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission responding to that ballot question. So the letter is of a record. It indicates that that the license was renewed on May 29, 2012, will expire June 8, 2032. They indicate the emergency planning is in their regulations and apply to all operating licenses, including those of renewed licenses. The agency can take appropriate actions as part of its ongoing safety oversight.
Can I just ask, did we send a copy of that to the folks that were advocating the, that, you know, saying a
Certainly.
letter?
Mm-hmm.
Just so they know what the response was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to put it in the record here, since we see it.
I sent them the letter, yeah.
Good idea.
Okay, the next one is the we've talked about with changes to the waterways, to the harbor management plan, but the D permits, and Carl Shute brought his petition, again, Alan McMullen joined Carl in discussing some of the history. I think you'll have see some of that documentation.
Madam Chairman?
Yes?
Chairwoman?
I'm keeping track, Ed. Don't worry.
It's late.
I'm telling you, I'll get you one of these days.
Linda?
Yes.
Supreme Commander.
Mr. Shute suggested that that material be added to the minutes of a meeting several weeks ago.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Exactly.
Yes.
The minutes
It
of
can be
June
added to
25th.
the minutes of this meeting.
It will be added
Right.
to the minutes of this meeting.
Correct.
Absolutely, Ed.
With regard to Route 124, if you recall, we had contemplated whether or not to add an article funding from local funds and a ballot question. Quite frankly, a discussion with Lynn Cooper discouraging him from proceeding that way. But we do have a letter of record from your board supporting the project that was dated April 16th. So again, I
2
think
years ago.
Dave, Ryan, and I still continue to try to advocate for Chapter 90 funds to continue the project without going to ballot. There's next item deals with a particular litigation and fact that the town council's not intending to represent parties before the judge.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
That case is, that suit is being brought in Lane Court in Boston. Normally, these things go to Barnstable, do they not?
Not land court.
Okay.
Depends how, the registration of the land.
Okay, I was just wondering whether we could get it into
No,
Barnstable.
it depends if it's registered land, yeah. I think Mr. McManus had posed questions several weeks ago, and I've been in communication with regard to the Conley's oil spill, Weston, and we do have Senator Wolf's aide responding, keeping in touch with us, and you can see there's been some litigation back and forth on liability with regard to the Conley's property.
Well, I'm gratified that our state representatives are keeping some pressure on and keeping DEP interested in trying to find a solution. But quite honestly, as I read this and other documents and news I've heard, quite honestly, I don't understand why anybody would have Cape Cod Oil as their supplier, given how they're treating these people.
You can see that the contentiousness of the litigation. Did get a chance to speak with Rich Larios, who did conduct the capital outlay tour on bus this morning. I understand it went well. We had department heads at various locations, and
I joined them on that.
Did you? Good. And Dave Ryan has indicated a golf adjustment journal entry as of 6/28, amount of $27,800.
Microphone.
Oh, I'll point my question to Ed because he's more politically involved than I am, but I didn't really see these letters coming from our congressman. Where were they adding support to the Connollys other than just keeping us informed? I didn't see where they were advocating for any action or
No,
doing anything.
Seth from Senator Wolf's.
And it's just not in here, it's happening
Right,
elsewhere.
he's
I
been
read this,
advocating.
What's this ad?
The problem that had happened is DEP, in doing these cases, hire a contractor to manage it for them, and then they step away.
No, I got that. I just expected some of these letters for, is there
Well,
some more active, can you do something to work it out, or, something?
Well, it's all done basically between the senator's staff members and their contacts at the various agencies, in re-engaging, in getting them to re-engage in the process.
So
It's
it's
not
not spelled out here, but
Yeah,
we
no,
substitute
no.
doing
On that
something
big one.
anyway.
Yes, yes.
Multiple
DEP
signatures.
has been brought back into it.
Because I read this and it didn't warm me up at all that
Yeah,
they were doing
yeah.
anything.
No.
The last one is multiple.
Thank you, Ed. That, hopefully that makes you feel better.
With regard to all set?
Yeah.
Alan Harvard dredging, Angela and I continue to work on that, trying to provide information to the abutters. John Bologna, who's the president of Coastal Engineering, assured us that he has staff assigned to take Roy Okarowski's place. They're still scheduling to do the pre-survey of the harbor late August when they get the boats maneuvered in place. We do have the county coming in to dredge the channel so that it's deep enough to get the dredge in and out during various tides. We still have the issue of where and how to deposit the sand from the channel. We're putting out bids right now, looking for private bidders to assist. I think the county dredge is around $61,000 just for that channel. So hopefully we can put some of the sand on our beaches. I've continued to pose questions to Mike Ford to see if we could put it on Beach Road. And as you've probably seen correspondence that the abutters are still posing the question. So hopefully in a combination of private deposits and on town beaches, we can find a way to dispose of that channel dredge. And again, Harbor Master's working with the boat owners to try to maneuver the boats around, getting ready. Concom received a request from, I think, the Trails Committee to build a parking lot at Bell's Neck on the north side of Great Western Road, about 5 or 6 spaces, and so they're working with Conservation Trust on building those. We own quite a bit of property, as I understand, on the abutting the Herring River north. And I've not hiked that area, but apparently it's pretty nice. Got several trails already up there. Ed had already talked about Christine Wood and her contributions to the town. We have a recreation director report, and again, as a follow-up to the fatal motorcycle accident at the transfer station, there was a request for improvements, and that'll go to that newly created public safety group.
One moment, Jim. Gentlemen? Thank you. Jim?
There was writing on the blackboard after class if you keep it.
Thank you, Mrs. McMahon.
Ooh.
Skip had posed a couple of legal questions, and I wanted to provide you with the town council's opinions with regard to conflict of interest and what the regional agreement did or did not require with regard to building a high school.
You missed a signature. On that matter of conflict of interest, Mr. Wilkins rightfully recused himself because he was serving as a selectman in a town position and as a member of a board
of a private
agency.
Right.
Tonight, I abstained from voting because I serve on the board of directors of WOMR. You know, you do that when it's a non-municipal organization.
Right.
The building committee is considered a municipal organization. It's like we have Larry representing us with the County Wastewater Collaborative. Does that mean that when we have an issue here on wastewater, he has to recuse himself from participating? No.
I think it would be a good idea.
Well, but I think, Ed, it was a good idea for us to get the legal opinion and just put it to bed.
Right. Mm-hmm. I think that's it for the weekly.
Ed, anything Selectmen's report? Ed?
No.
Peter?
I'm good, thank you.
Angela? Move to adjourn?
So moved.